They had burned the sweet rushes in the great hall so the smell would lift above the feasting, but the heat of torches and bodies pressed everything close. Laughter thudded against the timbered beams and stuck there like resin. The banners took the warmth, made it shiver along their edges. Gray direwolf, golden lion, crowned stag, and shadows crawled in their folds. Jon stood in the lee of a pillar where the glow ran thin and where the servants passed with trencher and flagon, the soft soles of their shoes whispering with straw and spilled beer. He did not belong in the light near the dais. It was an old lesson and it rubbed the bones smooth. He watched his father with the king. Eddard Stark's face had not changed with the years so much as set more firmly along the lines it had always promised. Austere, a face carved by frost and duty. Across from him, Robert Baratheon was a man thrown open. The king's laugh was a thing with weight, pouring over bread and meat and men alike, slapping shoulders, daring anyone to be dour in its reach. He drank as if trying to drown something the way a man might drown a wasp that had stung him a long time ago and still hung in his nerves. A boy with cheeks red from kitchen heat nearly collided with Jon. He muttered an apology, eyes darting to the bastard's face, and was gone, leaving the faint scent of onions and grease. Ghost had slipped beneath the table a while ago and lay now at Jon's boots, a pale shape no brighter than mist. His eyes banked coals watching the hall. The direwolf yawned without sound, tongue pale as a slice of fat, and rested his muzzle on his paws again. "Drink," said a voice at Jon's shoulder, amused, friendly, and not unkind. Benjen Stark, hair already caked with a day's travel dust though he'd bathed, because the road never washed off all the way. He pressed a small cup into Jon's hand and clinked his own against it. "Before someone notices you haven't grown up and drags you away to be a page to some lordling." "I'm near grown," Jon said, but he took the drink. The wine bled warmth into his throat. He knew better than to drink deeply in such a press. He had seen too often what loosened tongues found and could not put away. "You won't be here long." Benjen's mouth tipped. "The wall is hungry. It remembers those who promise and keeps them to their word." He was not in black this night out of courtesy to the king and the Northman who was father to them both in different ways. But even without the wool and the color, the chill of that far line seemed to cling to him. It gathered in the hollows of his eyes, in the way his laughter came easy and went quickly. "You've a mind to take the black too, if your letters to me tell the truth, which I do not expect them to do, being from a boy with snow for a name." Jon had rehearsed a dozen replies across a dozen nights lying awake, the castle stone wrapped around him, the hearth low, ghost at his belly like a second heat. He found none of them easy on his tongue here with the king in Winterfell and the hall full of Lannisters and the thought that the whole order of the world had twisted a notch as soon as the royal party rode under the broken tower. So he said only, "We will speak tomorrow," in a voice that wished to be certain. Benjen took it for what it was and did not press. "Tomorrow, then, and if you mean to stand before me, stand squared." He lifted his chin toward the dais. "Look at them. That is a memory you should have for the long cold nights. Your father with his friend made king, and all the old branches bound together for an hour." Jon looked. King Robert had a chicken leg in his big hand and used it as punctuation, tapping the polished board to mark the end of his jokes. Cersei Lannister sat with spine smooth as glass and a mouth like a cut she would not let bleed. Sansa had been called to sing earlier, and her voice floated still in Jon's year-lingering mind, not for its clarity but for the way Arya's chin had set hard with envy. And there was Jaime Lannister, golden, 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 as if any light was his by right and his hair had been spun to coin. His smile would have fit well on a statue's face. Significant but meaningless. The sounds swelled and thinned in waves. When he shut out the talk, other threads rose. The hiss of fat from the boar turning, the soft scrape of knife on trencher, the creek's constant murmur through its stone course beneath Winterfell's floors. Later, when the king had staggered laughing into the promise of more cups in a more private room and men had sung themselves out of bravery and into the gentle weight of sleep, when Sansa had wept because the queen had admired her embroidery and Arya had torn her own with an angry needle, Jon walked away from the breathing of animals and the lingering warmth. He knew the castle's night paths like skin. The air deepened as he descended to the crypts. A man could walk there carrying all the fires of the hall in his arms, and they would gutter in that underground mouth. The stone drank light greedily. Ghost came at his calf, stepping as noiselessly as always, but his fur seemed to dim. Jon felt the crypts cool like a hand on the back of his neck. He went past the kings of winter and the princes and lords, any of whom might have been his ancestors in some roundabout way because the North tangled its stories and never cut them free. He stopped at the woman whose statue had been carved with flowers laid over her lap, as if some mason had remembered something particular about her and could not keep his hands from telling it in the rock. Lyanna's stone eyes did not accuse. They did not weep. They simply were like the names a man could not change. He had learned her face before he learned letters, as every Stark child did, legitimate or no. He tried not to ask the questions for which there were no answers. Sometimes he failed. Benjen's talk had set all the old resolves and doubts pulling at one another again. He had wanted the wall because it was honorable, because it was clean, because it gave a bastard a place and a name to be proud of. He had wanted it because men there were judged by the steadiness of their hands and the strength they saved for others. He had wanted it because in the quiet hours of Winterfell, with the wolves calling, it had seemed a kind of oath he could take that would explain him to himself. Yet tonight another kind of oath hovered in the rafters with the smoke. That his Lord Father would go south for the king and carry with him something the North used to have and could not spare, and Jon would watch him ride away and call the doing of it right. "Tell me," he said to the cold stone, and his voice carried only a little way, dying in the heavy air. "Tell me what I am to do." Ghost's ears lifted. The direwolf's head turned slightly in that disconcerting way of his, as if hearing men farther off, things below things, and then a step echoed in the crypt behind Jon, measured, certain. He turned, and his father came out of the dark. Eddard Stark carried a candle and something in the slump of his shoulders that he had put down years ago and was taking up again. "Do you come to ask the dead for counsel?" Ned asked, setting the candle on a low ledge where the flame trembled as though it, too, were not quite brave enough for this place. "I come because they do not talk too much," Jon said. The words tumbled out harsher than he meant, but Ned's mouth softened, not stung. "The living make a worse habit of that than the dead," he answered. He folded his hands as if the air were cold, though they were far beneath the north wind. "Benjen said you wished to speak with me tomorrow." Jon thought of how to scale back, of how to ask another day from himself to settle. He could not. The crypt's air made words come true. "I did wish to speak. I do now." He put his palm on the cool stone at Lyanna's side and took it away quickly. It felt like sacrilege to use her as courage. "I would ride south with you." He had not meant to say it so abruptly. Eddard Stark had the kind of stillness that made a man speak softly, but the words had their own momentum once they were alive. Jon waited. Ghost stood very still, only the wind of his nose moving. "That is not what you told your uncle," Ned said finally. "No," Jon said. "Tonight is not last month, nor last year. I thought I could be content with the wall when the world did not change in front of my eyes." He swallowed. It was not fear. It was merely the throat's way of understanding what the mouth did not yet. "I know I am not wanted at court. I know what a bastard is among lords and ladies and men who think gold is better than bread. But I am your blood. I can carry a sword and hold my tongue, and I am better at both than many who will go. I can ride behind when pride walks ahead. I can do quiet things that still need doing. Arya will not be careful. Sansa will be too careful. Robb will have to be too many things to too many men and will not see the shadow until it is on his boot. Take me with you." Ned's face did not change. He had never been a man to write his thoughts on his brow, but he did not hide them either. He kept them in a discipline more severe than concealment. "You have always wanted the black," he said. "I have wanted a name I could wear that did not cut me," Jon answered, finally finding the shape of the truth. "But the name that fits is the one I already have. I do not mean to grow old in rooms where I have no windows. I am not shamed to change my mind if honor tells me to do so. It is not the wall I seek. It is purpose. and I think the gods are stirring the boards. I know little, but I am not blind." Ned's gaze flickered to Lynna's stone profile. It was not a movement born of fear or even of longing, but of a muscle that remembered a habit. "The South will not be kind to you, Jon. It is kind to few," Jon said, and felt something grim but steady lift in him. "I do not ask the South to be kind. I ask you to take me to it." Ned was quiet a long time. The candle flame guttered and returned to itself. The crypt breathed around them. When he spoke, it was as if he had decided only that he could not put off deciding. "Catelyn will not like this," he said. "She has not liked much about you, but I will not teach you to be a coward by making my own fears your chain. We have never done that to one another, you and I." He drew in a breath and let it out as if something knotted in his chest had given way. "You will ride with me, in my household, not in the king's. You will be no one's page. You will be my son in all things a man can be without making his wife a liar. Do you understand me?" Heat gathered in Jon's eyes, surprising him with its immediacy. He looked down to Ghost so he would not shame himself. "Yes," he said. The word did not break. "We will speak of what that means when the sun is up and the day is full of plans," Ned said. "For now, you will go to your bed and sleep as little as the rest of us." They climbed toward the hall and it spent warmth. At the threshold, Jon stopped and turned. He had the sense of many eyes on his back, and he could not tell if that was childish fancy or something more serious in a place where the bones of many men were stacked with their oaths like firewood. "Thank you," he said. "If I had thanked my own father less and asked him questions more." Ned began and then shook his head, not because he regretted it, but because he would not make that story tonight. "Go on. There will be things to pack, horses to see to. Ghost will need a new saddle strap. He has grown again and the old one will not hold." They parted in the cold corridor where the torchlight pooled. It was late enough that even the castle's unsleeping corners were silent, as if the timber held its breath around them. Jon went first to Arya. She had fallen asleep on her belly with her arms thrown over her head, as if she'd been captured in a leap and pinned by sleep mid-air. Needle lay on the table by the bed, wrapped in the old brown cloth that made her feel wicked and sweet by turns. He eased the door wider and Ghost slid in before he could forbid it. The dire wolf put his cold nose on Arya's ankle, and she stirred with a groan, rolling to glare. "It's the middle of the night," she said, and then, seeing him, she sat up so fast her hair attacked her face like a brush, and she had to claw it aside. "What?" he told her. Only the bare bones. That he would go with their father when he left Winterfell. That he would not wear black wool. That she must be careful and must not be careful, in due measures. He told her what he knew he could tell her now. That nothing in the world would keep her from being herself, and that was both the danger and the advantage she would carry like a knife under a coat. She listened with her knees up, chin on them, ghost of a smile and something else struggling across her mouth. When he had finished, she said, "Good, good." Her eyes were bright, fiercely alive, daring him to contradict her. "They would have sent you away where I couldn't get to you. This is better. We'll make Sansa be brave." "Sansa is brave," he said. "Just in the ways you think don't count." Arya made an unhappy noise. "Her doll has more courage than... Oh, you know." Then she kicked her heel against the bedpost in thought. "You'll need another strap for Ghost." "So I've been told," he said, and surprised them both by laughing. He did not go to Sansa's room. There were words for her, lovely ones that would tell her he had seen how she sang with a flush like wine, and how the candlelight found a gold thread in her hair now and again and made something of it that the weavers had not intended. But those words would be trite in his mouth, and Sansa would not like to know Jon noticed such things. He went to the yard instead. The sky was wolfskin and deep. The stars had gone cold and far. He breathed in the stones one last time as if they had a scent only the sleepless knew, and he considered what the south might smell like and how he would carry both in him without one souring the taste of the other. Catelyn came to him as he returned to his chamber. There was a light in her hand and one in her eyes, and he could not say which one he found harder to bear. Her mouth was counsel and command. Her shoulders had the set of a woman who had come to do a thing and would do it cleanly even if it cost her. Ghost tensed, not in bare-teeth warning, but in the way that wolves assess a place and mark its entrances. "I have kept my peace on much," Catelyn said without preamble, even before the greetings that civilizations use to pretend they are not wolves with better clothes. "I lost the argument to send you away when you were small." He would not hear it. Eddard is an honorable man, and that is sometimes its own kind of cruelty. "But I will not have you go south, bastard, to stand with my daughter and frighten her prospects, to whisper to my lord husband in corridors as if some part of him were not mine before it was ever yours." She had the gift of words that hit exactly where they were meant to and nowhere else. Jon held his breath and then let it go. "I do not mean to whisper to your husband," he said, though truth compelled him to add. "Nor will I stand by while men do harm because my birth makes me shy." "You cannot truly think you will not make trouble simply by existing," Catelyn said. Her eyes were not unkind, which made the words worse. "In the South, a bastard is not a boy who serves well and knows when to leave the room. He is a weapon and a story, and men will take you up and play you against me for sport and for what they call advantage." Her hand tightened on the candlestick. The light jumped and her face seemed for a moment to show all the years she had had to hold these long, cold conversations and not let them burn her. "If you have any gentleness in you, for them, Sansa and Arya, and even for me, you will turn back to the idea that once comforted you and go to the wall." "I might do that," Jon said, surprising himself. "More truth, more stone. But not because fear shoves me. You are wrong to think I go south to be taken up like a stick. I go to stand between your daughters and the hands men might put on them when they think no one is looking. I go to stand between my father and those who will smile and count his honor like coins they can take, one by one, while he looks away. If I stayed in this keep and you heard that Sansa had been shamed because I was not there to see and to stop it, would you think better of me then?" Her breath broke. She had not expected him to answer like a man. "You put me to a cruelty," she murmured. "You tell me that the bastard will be a shield, and I must hate you for it because I need it. Do not call me unjust if I continue to be cold to you. My heart is for my children. That is the law I live by. I do not expect your warmth," he said, "nor your blessing, only your forbearance." She held his eyes another heartbeat and then, because she was too regal for mere pettiness, she bowed her head a fraction. "Forbearance," she repeated, "for their sake, and for his." She turned away then, moving like a queen from a courtroom. Not hurrying, because to hurry would be to admit more than pride could bear. In the gray rim before dawn, the yard woke. The forge had already thrown sparks against the half-light, and the stable yard clattered with tack. The banners in the wind made their own rough song. Jon moved among the men with his sleeves rolled, checking girths and straps, carrying saddle soap and water, hearing the lilting northern jests and the deeper, cleaner silences between them. Ghost paced, enduring the affectionate curses and disguised fear of the horses with a disdain that was almost human. Robb grinned when he saw him. "So," he said, "no vows today from either of us." He put his hand on Jon's shoulder and squeezed. "I am glad. I had not the stomach to watch you ride away into the white and know that I could do nothing about it. Now I shall only watch you ride away into the green and know that I may chase you someday when duties loosen and father lets the leash go." "You will be lord here," Jon said, "and I will have to ask your leave to come home." "You will have it," Robb said. His smile faded a little as the thought tucked itself in. "Even if my lady wife is proud and southern and hates the cold." He shook the fancy away with the resilient arrogance of a boy who has not yet met the grindstone. "We will race to the King's Road if father lets us. Theon says he will beat us both. I told him I would plant his face in the yard before I would let that happen." "Theon's face has had plenty of dirt," Jon said. They could both look like they did not want to hug then, so they clapped each other's shoulders like boys in a yard, as it should be. Sansa came with hair smoothed and a cloak pinned just so. She looked at him as at a puzzle whose picture did not match the pieces. She made a small courtesy, and he bowed more deeply than she had expected him to. She colored, which he would have spared her if he could. "You will do very well," he said, not because he believed court would be fair to her, but because he believed she would make all unfairness look ugly in its turn by surviving it in style. Arya appeared with her boots half done and Ghost at her hip, her chin daring anyone to make a remark about decorum. "He'll bite if Joffrey touches you," she informed Sansa cheerfully, indicating the direwolf. "Do not let him," Sansa said, appalled and yet enthralled. "You must keep him on a leash. In the city, that's what one does. If anyone tries a leash on Ghost, I will eat it myself before he does," Jon said, and the wolf sneezed his eye. In agreement, they formed to ride. King Robert's party looked like a feast laid out on horseback. Rich meats, bright fruits, shining plates stacked in hierarchy. Winterfell's men-at-arms were a more workmanlike spread. Brown bread, stout cheese, knives to cut and carve. Ned Stark in his plain riding cloak made the space between the two look like a bridge steady enough for any man to cross if he had a mind. Cersei watched Jon as if she could fix him to wax. Jaime did not look at him at all and thus examined him thoroughly. Joffrey laughed in the easy and expensive way of a boy who had always had an audience. Sandor Clegane gave him half a glance and a grunt that might have been mocking or might have been the only prayer the hound still said. They left Winterfell under a sky-washed pale. The gray walls took the dawn without comment. The gods would stood as it had stood when kings had been carved out of ice and men had thought that worthy work. Jon turned in the saddle once. He did not pretend it was to check on something practical. Winterfell would hold him whether he looked back or not. He looked anyway. The King's Road ran like a rule drawn on a page, stern with intent. It cut through the world, asking it to grow up around its edges. They rode in a long arrangement that changed without seeming movement. Sometimes Jon found himself closer to the king's hunters, sometimes folded into the shadow of a wagon where the household stewards clicked their tongues over lists in their heads. He learned to spot the men who would talk and those who would rather keep their mouths as shut as their packs. He learned the rhythm of the day, the morning with its company of cold noses and fresh horses, the noon when even a good saddle bit, the late afternoon that made the world seem full of promises it could not keep, and the night when the fire made the dark step back and Robert's laugh tried to do the same. On the second evening out, they made a camp on ground that sloped only a little. The wind came around the trees in a way that suggested a thoughtfulness Jon approved of. The king hung a lantern on a pole and summoned Eddard with a gesture that would have been graceless from any other man. With Robert, it was merely native authority. Jon did not follow. He kept to the edges as he had promised. He watched the Lannister men set up their own separate bright fire as if heat should be measured out by house and title, and he watched the queen choose not to look toward the louder circle where Robert and his favorites drank. "Do you mean to haunt the rim of this court all the way to the city, bastard?" A voice said behind him, precise, curious, and white as flour in the dark. Tyrion Lannister had joined the king's party the day before at the last of the smaller northern holdings, where a lord had poured welcome like someone frightened that to be stingy would draw down a winter in summer. He had taken to the fire like a man takes to his third glass, with enjoyment and private calculation both. He moved through the camp like someone for whom it would always make a path. "I mean to keep promises I made," Jon said. "Which promises?" Tyrion asked, sounding delighted at the prospect of being given a list. "All the ones worth keeping," Jon answered, and watched the dwarf's eyes spark with humor at being thwarted. "Your blood runs to the laconic. It is almost irritating." Tyrion poured wine into a cup and offered it. Jon hesitated, then took it. "This is a curious arrangement. One expects bastards to go north and noble daughters to go south. You invert the map. I approve. Inversions make the simple fools knock their heads on the tables and the clever fools show their teeth. Which are you?" Jon asked before he remembered to be polite. Tyrion grinned as if Jon had performed for him. "Whichever is useful to be at the moment," he said cheerfully. "I hear you intended for months to take black and now you take silk." "I take neither," Jon said. "I take leather and ride with my father, who has asked no one but his god's permission to do it." The dwarf lifted his cup in salute. A classical answer. Simple. It will anger complicated men. He looked toward the brighter circle of the king's companions. Be careful of angering complicated men. They marshal small thoughts like armies, and behind their eyes are maps on which your life is only a river to be bridged. He tilted his head toward where Cersei sat, the lamplight cutting her face into fineness. Especially queens. A queen is a bridge across which men drag their plans like carts. Jon followed the line of that gaze. Cersei Lannister's beauty was not the sort that warmed. Took light from other places and kept it. Her hair caught fire and made no smoke. I am not a plan, Jon said. I am a person. So say we all, Tyrion murmured. And yet, he shrugged. I ride north in a few days to see a wall someone told me would impress me, and because my sister thinks I ought to get out of her sight as if that could erase me. If I were to meet you riding the other way through an inn-yard, I would give you different advice. As it is, I suggest you remember you are a man before you are any man's bastard or the king's suspicion. He left Jon with that and stumped off to flirt with the purple of Catelyn Stark's disdain from across a safe distance. He seemed to enjoy danger most when it had given up on its ability to do hurt. Jon rolled the stem of the cup between his fingers and fed Ghost a strip of dried meat he had saved so the wolf would forgive him for making him endure too much talk. Later, when the king's laughter was a low thunder and the night insects had found a steady harmonic to fill the spaces between human noise, Jon went to his father. Ned sat with Jory Castle and several of the Winterfell men at a smaller fire a little removed from the royals. He had a cup and a slice of bread and meat that he did not seem to taste. His eyes rose when Jon came near, and all the severity in them softened by a degree, as if someone had put their hand on a wound and felt it stop bleeding. You kept to your promise, Ned said. I did, Jon answered, but promises are easier to keep than thoughts. My thoughts run all over. Ned's mouth twitched, which for him was laughter. The trick is to let them run to a place and then pen them there. He gestured to the empty space on a log. Sit. Tell me where your thoughts run. I will tell you which fences to build. So Jon spoke of Tyrion Lannister and of Catelyn's words and of Arya's fierce blessing and Sansa's worry and of the unplaceable pressure he felt. Like when snow is about to fall and men's voices change with the knowledge that they must soon take shelter. He said nothing of the crypt. That was not because he wished to keep it back as a secret, but because there are some cold one learns not to put into words. Ned listened, truly listened, as he always had when Jon brought him stone-hard questions. The South has a different grammar, Ned said at last. The same words are put in different places, but the words are the same. Men and women want their children safe and their house held up when the wind blows. They want bread to be bread and not a promise broken over and over until it means only hunger. Remember that when you talk to men with larger words than work in their mouths, they are no different. There is just more silk between the bread and the teeth. Do you regret it? Jon asked. He did not have to say what it was. The king had asked and the father had said yes. The north turned in that yes and the south would come north on the road that yes made. Ned looked toward Robert's light and then past it, as if the dawn might already be lifting somewhere. I regret many things, he said, but I do not regret saying yes to the man who was my brother when there were wolves in every corridor and men hanged for less than speaking their hunger. There is a debt in that, his voice hardened slightly, and there is also a debt to the north. I will see one paid without breaking the other, if I can. He looked at Jon and smiled very slightly. Do not drink more than you can stand and then try to stand in front of someone who hopes you will fall. Watch with both eyes. Use just one mouth. I can do that, Jon said, because if a man makes his advice practical, you can trip over its usefulness in the dark. They rode again, and the terrain shifted under them in degrees so steady it seemed each day came from the same mold until Jon turned back and saw that the world no longer wore the furs of the far north. The trees thinned. The wind carried damp in its pockets. They came to Moat Cailin, and the causeway lay ahead like the spine of a thing so old men had put their roads upon it when they learned that straight lines and stone were one kind of courage against soft ground. The moat had not fallen. It had sunk. Its superiorities, the thick walls and cunning angles, had made an old peace with the swamp and let the water take them up to the chin. The towers were broken teeth black with old damp. The frogs had passenger rights on every surface. Jon smelled rot and green and something that had never left this place in all its years and would not be moved by kings. The party dismounted to lead the horses. The causeway was stone, but the bog had a way of reaching for anything human as if it had acquired a taste for it. Crannogmen watched, or so the men said quietly. Jon could feel the habit of being watched even if he could not put his finger on an eye. He took the order of the thing. One step then another, careful with hooves, careful with hearts. Men can march carelessly from arrogance as much as from ignorance. He saw neither in the Winterfell guards. The Lannister men complained, but they did not dare complain loudly where the mud could make good men sink. Jaime Lannister went lightly as if roads came when he needed them. Cersei lifted her hem as if the wet were an insult to which she would someday return an answer lined with red. The Hound cursed the entire enterprise in a voice low and steady, as if he had learned that shouting made the bog hungrier. At the southern end of the causeway, the air changed like a room that has had its window opened. The King's Road there was still stern, but it felt laid upon a different order of the world. The king made a great show of breathing like a man who had wrestled with the swamp and won, though the swamp had barely noticed. He clapped Lord Stark on the back and declared for anyone who would listen that he'd have a soy sauce sort of stew at this night's camp, spiced enough to make a boar throw itself on a spear for relief. No one mentioned that northern tongues were better at plain foods and that the nearest kitchen with foreign spices was a week away. They came into the riverlands, and the rivers did what rivers do, made a land. The road ran higher where it could, but men must cross and so roads must dip. And there were places where the memory of old floods lay in the mud like stories of the last feast. They saw fields tilted with wheat and barley, with hay strung up like coin. The wind ran smoother, talking in a different dialect than the one at home, and the men began to speak of inns they remembered and beers that had their own names even to men who drank widely. At one such inn, the Crossroads, where the floors had been sanded with long use and the rafters had collected the smoke of 3 generations, the king declared for a night in a bed that did not have wheels. The Lady Catelyn's mouth tightened, but she bowed. The queen said nothing, which meant more. The benches filled with bodies and then stories, and the stories with lies, and the lies with laughter. Jon kept to the outer tables with the men who guarded the walls of stories so that they did not collapse and crush their tellers. Ghost lay with his chin on the threshold, as if considering whether he had the right to bar the way to those who believed themselves carved of better wood. Tyrion Lannister came through the door with a dampness on his face that said it had begun to rain as he walked from some separate room the innkeeper kept for men with gold. He shook himself like a small clever dog and found Jon without looking, as if his mind collected the unusual and catalogued it no matter where he went. "A good house," he declared. "The walls lean politely. The beer is not ambitious. The bread is warm enough that butter tells the truth when it meets it." "Do you praise the same truth in men?" Jon asked. "No," Tyrion said happily. "Men lie, and I like to see how far they will go. Women are friendlier with the truth, but will stab you with it if you try to take too much of it into your hands." He clambered into the chair and sat on his knees to see the table properly. "I have decided to ride north in the morning. This place makes me want higher air and fewer people who think they know which side of their cup is the top." "You dislike inns?" Jon asked. "I like them too well," Tyrion said. "That is their danger. One could live in such places and believe the world to be made of cheese and song. The wall is colder and does not sing. It will remind me of things that are unpleasant and therefore necessary." He sipped his food like a man who had been taught to make every gesture serve both appetite and perception. "You will ride south and we will trade places in the story. If you meet me again, I will have a tale about giants which you will pretend not to believe and then believe a little in spite of yourself." There was a scuffle then near the hearth. One of those quick, unconsidered shoves men give each other when too much ale has taught their hands to do things their heads would not. The Hound appeared without seeming to walk, only to have stepped out of the angle between 2 shadows. His face was what fire does to men when it forgets they are not fuel. He stood with one hip loose and his hand on the pommel. His eyes were not interested in the men. They were interested in the shapes violence makes. He seemed disappointed when a look from Jory untangled the moment and made it a mere embarrassment. "Clegane," Tyrion said under his breath, as if mentioning a weather pattern. "When he dreams truly, he dreams teeth." Later, Jon found the king true to his boast. A man sunk full length into a bed that creaked as if his weight were a revelation. Robert had thrown one arm over his face. Without the crown and the laughter and the meat, he looked like a big man lying under a tree on a summer day because he could not think what else he wanted to do next. The room smelled of wine and leather and something slight and metallic, as if a smell could be a memory. Ned stood at the window where the leaded glass made the rain into 100 small roads. "He wants to cross the Trident by the ford where he killed Rhaegar," Ned said without turning. "Of course he does." Jon thought of the songs that had braided the story of that battle into a thing boys could wear around their throats. The songs had given it a simplicity the rain on the glass did not have. "Will he look for rubies?" he asked, because men joked in such ways when the seriousness grew beyond them. "He will look for everything he lost there," Ned said. "And he will not find it, and that will make him angry, and what he does with that anger will be—" He stopped, perhaps because he realized he had begun to walk into words that might lead to a place he could not leave. He put his hand on Jon's shoulder instead. "See to your girls," he said. "The queen has a certain thought in her eye tonight. It is not yet aimed at anyone in particular. I do not like to leave it wandering." So Jon went. He found Sansa speaking to the queen in a voice that was trying on a cadence it would have to grow into. Cersei smiled, and every tooth of that smile had been ground on a different millstone. One for pity, one for superiority, one for memory, one for calculation. "There is something so," she said delicately, looking at Sansa's cloak, "so very north about you. I expect to find ice on my glass after you have touched it." She turned a little, and the light moved on her like a promise that would not be made. "And you, Snow, will you be tame for my court? Or will you howl? It is good to have a hound that howls if you mean to frighten people." "I am not a hound," Jon said, and felt Arya's laughter in a room elsewhere, as if she would have enjoyed that. "I am a man." "So you said once already to my brother," the queen remarked lightly. "How delightful. Men are so very useful. They kill and they carry and they do not complain while you admire them." Her gaze slid away as if he had bored her. "It is late. Sleep, sweetling," she told Sansa, making the endearment sound sharper than it was. "Tomorrow your king will make a hero of himself again. We must all bring our best faces to the river." Sansa shivered with romance, and Jon wanted with a sudden, foolish, savage urgency to take her by the shoulders and shake the lesson into her that he and Robb had learned wrestling in the yard. Knife from the left hand. Watch the feet. Smile means nothing. The ground is always there even when the sky talks a good fight. He did not. That would be its own violence. He made sure Arya was where Arya ought to be. Under the table with a dog, dirty, eyes bright, and he talked with her in the code they were teaching each other of rolled eyes and shrugged shoulders and a kiss to Ghost's narrow head. They crossed the Trident by the ford. Men came to watch because memory does that to a place. It calls them like the promise of the first apple in spring. The river ran broader than stories had made it, and the stones underfoot were not obedient. Jon could almost see, like a painting laid over the reel, the shapes the storytellers had given to men. Their arms lifted, the horses arching, the blow like a thunderclap. The king did look, of course he looked, to where the ruby stream had been said to glitter. He smiled and it did not reach his eyes. He made merry. He was careful not to touch Ned when he did it. "Do not let him smell pity," Ned said out of the side of his mouth. "He will think it blood and hunt you for it." The day was bright. The air had the clear taste the world sometimes has when it means to be honest with you whether you asked or no. They made camp on the southern bank, all flags planted. Jon walked the line of the outermost guards because it was good to know where the edges of things were and what they looked like from both sides. He found Sandor Clegane there, not standing his watch, really, but standing anyway because he stood better than other men even when he was at leisure. The hound's scars were the sort of story you did not ask a man to tell you unless you meant to marry him. His eyes were bleak as a noon sky before a storm. "You stare like a dog with a bone," the hound said without looking at Jon. "I was measuring the dark behind your head," Jon said, and thought that he ought to be more careful whom he said such things to. But Clegane snorted, possibly pleased. "Measure all you like," he said. "It's bigger than you are." He gave Ghost a look that had more respect in it than most men spared for princes. "That one will know when the dark starts chewing back." A small silence fell, and he added, almost conversationally, "If the prince lays hands where he should not, which he will, give the wolf his throat. I'll swear up and down I never saw a thing. Imagine it, me blind as an old grandmother." Jon looked at him. There were men in the camp who would risk little to tell a truth. The hound risked nothing by telling one. He had already lost too much to fire and men to care whether they approved. "You dislike your prince," Jon said.
"Ibe no quarrel with."
"H the whelp," Clegane said. "I dislike the sound of what the world will make of him. He'll eat praise like a pig eats from a bucket and then squeal for more. It's not the eating, it's the squealing." He spat into the brush. "Keep your back to a tree when you piss. That's my advice to you, Snow. The world doesn't care if you're looking. It cares if it can get its hands around your throat." "I will take that to heart," Jon said. He meant it. Advice is often just insult with 2 coats of paint. But sometimes a man throws the truth at you because he has no other way to do you a kindness and no more appetite for gentleness. On their last day in the Riverlands, the sky went slate and the rain came with a persistence that made men shrug and then bend rather than curse it. The banners hung as if too heavy with their own worth. Jon saw a raven ride the rain's edge with a competence that made the best horse look clumsy. He rode near his father and said nothing. It was enough to be a shadow that could draw its own sword. He saw Queen's Guard in brilliant white. He saw small folk with cartwheels sunk in the mud. He saw the king draw breath as if every mile were a payment and he had forgotten why he owed it. That night around a sodden fire, he dreamed he was back in the crypt. He dreamed the candle sputtered and went out and that Ghost's eyes solved the dark. He dreamed he put his hand on Lyanna's stone knee and felt not cold but warmth, the warmth of a woman alive and frightened. He dreamed she said his name, not as one says a joke or a command, but as if the name itself were a cup and she were thirsty and had to drink. He woke with his mouth dry and the taste of iron in it, as if he had bitten his own tongue to keep from calling out. The camp stirred into the rain with the same good humor men give to evils that cannot be helped. He saddled his horse, checked Ghost's strap, and moved through the perimeter as the world brightened and yet did not under such a low lid of cloud. He looked south and thought of towers and red stone and gardens that would be green all year. He thought of rooms where men laid their plans like knives on a velvet cloth and did not admit they were sharp. He thought, too, of the wall and the promise he had turned from. He did not feel guilt. He felt only that it was not done with him or he with it, that someday he would look north and the north would look back as if noticing him for the first time again. But today was south, and the road reached for his horse's hooves, and the king threw his laugh into the rain, and the world as it had been was a room they had left with the door shut gently behind them. Between one breath and the next he felt watched. Not in the small way of Crannogman eyes behind reeds or a woodsman's curiosity at a lordling's party splattering his road. Watched like a man on the wrong side of a river is watched by a winter that decides to freeze him where he stands. He put a hand on Ghost's neck, and the direwolf's hackles lifted, each hair a small white blade. Eddard Stark turned in his saddle at the same moment and looked at him, and Jon knew from that movement that his father felt it too. That nameless thing that travels without horse or banner and changes a road into a corridor where men drop their voices. Their eyes caught a quiet exchange. No words. This was a language older than advice. A rider came out of the rain up ahead, bearing a message. The Lannister men stirred as if messages were meat. The king's face went from merry to wolfish in a heartbeat. Ned reached for the thing carefully, the way a man takes hold of an iron that has lain too near a forge. A bird wheeled and then was gone. The horses stamped. The banners dragged their bright ends in the mud that took without asking. Jon shifted his leg and felt the pull of his scabbard against his thigh and the wet against his boot and the shape of Ghost beside him, solid as a choice made. The south was ahead and the city and rooms of whispering. He fitted his breath to the horses and the horses to the roads and the roads to the long shape of the land as it slid under them. Around the men adjusted cloaks and checked straps and filed into the patterns they knew. Among them a bastard rode in silence and did what he had promised. He kept both eyes open and his single mouth shut. He held in his chest all the words he would need when the time came, and he let the rain write on his face the old things no man can change and the new path of a life that had turned, quietly, while the hall still laughed. When the King's Road crested and fell toward a valley where a cluster of oaks made a soft blackness in the gray, he thought he could hear, pouring thin but distinct as a thread through cloth, a wolf's cry carrying from a distance that was not the distance of miles. Ghost's ears pricked and the muscles under his coat answered with a tremor that was not fear. Jon did not turn back when he heard it. He did not have to. It was in him now, the call and the answer both. He put his hand out, and for a fraction of a heartbeat the rain itself seemed to lean toward his palm, like a living thing that had decided to confide in him reluctantly. The king spurred forward, wanting to outrun whatever the message had set on his heels. The queen watched with a gaze that could weigh and count a graveyard. Ned Stark set his jaw and rode a little faster to keep a friend within the length of an arm if that was where the world was going to ask him to hold a life. Men moved, water fell, the road wore them, and the future, uncoiled like a white snake across their path, tasted the air with a flick of its tongue and waited for them to come close. They did not hear, in all that rain and motion, the soft laugh of someone who did not laugh with their throat. It was the sound of plans that had been traveling all along by other roads, plans that did not mind the wet, did not mind the dark, plans that would arrive at the same time as the men who thought they were riding first. Jon Snow set his shoulders to the weather. He imagined the crypt's stillness, and he imagined the hot buzz of King's Landing, and he imagined his sisters' voices, one like a blade, one like a bell, and he thought of the way a man stands when he does not yet know which part of his life is being called to duty. He breathed. He rode. He kept the space between each moment even and open, like a patient man leaving room for an answer. The road narrowed between two rises thick with wet grass and stones that showed their backs like old seals in a mottled sea. They went single file. The king swore good-naturedly and made a joke about southern roads being made of silk and perfumed. Jory laughed. A horse far back shied and was soothed. The hound's voice said something harsh and meant to prevent panic. The queen spoke to her brother in a voice no one else could hear. The rain gentled without stopping, as if it had reached a point beyond which falling harder would be rude. Jon thought of Lyanna's stone flowers in the crypt and how the mason's chisel had made that softness out of something that did not want to be soft. He thought of the man who had held the chisel, and whether he had loved her or had simply watched a lord who did and tried to put that watching into the rock. He did not see the city yet. He did not know the shape of the chamber in which the next piece of his life would be asked for. He did not know which words would be needed and which would be too many. He knew only that the world would ask, and that he had placed himself where he could hear the asking. He felt Ghost beside him like an oath kept and like luck earned. He did not smile, but his mouth lost its winter. The rain moved off only a little, as if to let them think themselves not watched, and a thin line of brightness broke open in the clouds, a cut that let light glance along the wet leather and the blades and the eyes. Jon lifted his face into it the way a man leans toward a voice in a crowded hall, hoping to catch the one word that will tell him what kind of night it will be. The word did not come. It would not for a long time, but the shape of it approached, sure-footed as a rider who knows the road. Ghost's breath steamed briefly, then was gone. The King's Road bent, and they bent with it, and the banners lifted, and men, being men, went on, complaining of their saddles and of rain and of luck, ignorant in the only useful way, innocent because the next hour had not yet put its hand on their shoulders and told them, quietly, where to stand. By the ford, the morning broke wet and thin, a light that seemed to leak out of the low sky rather than rise. Mist hung in the hollows, unrolled from the river to the meadow so that grass blades wore beads like a miser's hoard. The camp's smoke went nowhere in particular, curling on itself as if reluctant to travel. Jon woke to the small sounds that mean a camp is alive. Leather rubbed on leather, a horse's patient teeth worrying at a strap, the clink of a spoon in a pot, before the larger ones arrived to bully the day into motion. Ghost stood at the tent's mouth with his head high, breathing the damp, his nose tilting to a slender thread of scent that made his ears flick once. "Go," Jon told him softly, and the white shape slid into the gray. Arya was gone when he looked for her. That was neither unusual nor reassuring. She had the art of turning the world into rooms she alone could find, then leaving them without leaving a smell. He ate bread that had abraded to a sweetness in the oven's heat and drank a thin beer that remembered grain and little else. When the king went to look at the river again and the queen declared herself above wet grass, the camp sagged along the edges as men took the chance to ease their collars and find a place, any place, to be for a while that was not under someone's command. Jon followed Ghost's line. It led not to the river but to a stand of alders tucked into the bank's turn where the mud had hardened enough to hold. He heard the first sound before he saw the players, the breath of children pretending to be quiet, which has its own distinct weight. He stepped into the screen of leaves and paused. Arya stood with her feet set like a boy who has learned not to trip himself and her stick angled as if it were a blade she had carried always and not a thing cut from a tree moments ago. Across from her, the butcher's boy, Micah, a bony lad with a face used to laughing at his own nerves, grinned and lunged. The sticks met with a clack that sounded as serious to them as steel. "Keep your point," Arya hissed as if repeating a lesson to herself. "And watch my feet, not my stick." Micah dutifully watched her feet and got smacked on his knuckles for his honesty. He yelped, then laughed, and went at her again. Ghost sat down, watching with the tolerant interest of a creature convinced that the children of men could not wobble the world too much before someone sensible set it back square. Jon would have let it go at that, would have made a small noise to let them know he was there, and so remind Arya to come back with him before the hound found her absent and decided to make a noise of his own. But the leaves stirred a second time, louder, and Sansa's voice, careful to be musical and not quite achieving it in her indignation, carried, "Joffrey, look, there she is again with that awful stick." The prince walked as if the grass had been taught to bear him differently. His hair collected what little light there was and made a show of it. He had on a new sword, narrow and proud of itself, with a lion worked on the pommel so that the light made it look ready to speak the word mine. He smiled at Arya as one smiles at an ant that has done something ambitious. Sansa came behind him, faltering slightly in the mud, determined to appear not to falter at all. "What is this?" Joffrey announced, because announcements gave the impression of power. "Playing at swords?" He made the last word intimate in order to make it cruel. "Boy, where is your master?" Micah's grin fled. "I have none, my lord." Joffrey's lips thinned with the pleasure of the stutter. "Do you, girl?" He looked at Arya as if she might bite like something wild. "Or are you as untaught as your clothes?" Arya shifted her feet, and Jon saw the old instincts crowd up. "Answer, do not answer. Tell the truth so hard it chips a tooth." She settled on defiance because that was what her spine had been cut to. "We were practicing," she said evenly. "There's no harm in it." "No harm," Joffrey echoed, meaning to soak the phrase in contempt. He drew the blade with a hiss that the scabbard offered up too willingly, as if the leather liked to be part of such theater. "Here is harm," he said, admiring how the blade looked next to the plain sticks. "Show me what you do with your pig boys club." Micah moved backward so quickly that his heel found the only hollow and betrayed him. He fell to a knee, his stick clumsy, his breath loud. Joffrey stepped in and pricked him. The cut was shallow, the bright red immediate, the gasp shocking purely because pain always makes mouths honest. Sansa made a sound like a bird that does not know whether it is singing or being caught. "Stop," Arya said. She did not shout. She did not ask. She commanded, with that wintry stark authority that had crept into her voice without her noticing when she listened to her father talk to men. Joffrey looked up, annoyed by the tone. "And who are you to tell your prince?" Arya's stick came down and cracked his wrist. It was not a cruel strike, just true. The sword jumped out of his hand and went into the grass, the river's damp coiling around it affectionately. Joffrey stared at his wrist as if the bone itself had insulted him by hurting. Then he struck back, open-handed at Arya's face, and Arya leaped aside. Micah, whose courage had the desperate honesty of cornered small folk, swung wildly at the prince. Ghost's ears went back. Jon stepped forward. He did not draw. His body found the exact place it had been wanting to be, between Arya and danger, the way a hand interposes itself on a candle's path when a child leans too close. "Enough," he said, but the word lost purchase in a moment that had decided to run downhill. Nymeria came out of the reed's gray as the river's own thought and hit Joffrey's forearm with a sound like wet cloth torn. She did not tear to maul. She bit to instruct. It did not matter. Blood came, bright and argumentative. Joffrey's scream made the trees hold their leaves tighter. Sansa cried out, and her hands went to the air as if she could gather the world and smooth it. "Off," Jon snapped, sharp as a thrown stone, and the direwolf's yellow eyes flicked to him, recognized rank, and let go as if a trap had been sprung from the inside. She wheeled back toward Arya at once, nudging her knee, wanting the packmate to move. For a heartbeat, no one did. Then the moment after that arrived in a rush. Sansa leaning toward the prince to comfort what he would not let be comforted. Joffrey cursing in a high, broken voice that made the curses feel wrong-footed. Micah darting like a fish for the screen of reeds. Arya grabbing at Nymeria's scruff and yanking her toward the water. "Run," Jon said, to Arya and to the wolf both. He did not say it loudly. He said it as if telling his own hand to do a careful thing. Not back to camp. Away. Far. Now. He did not move to shield Joffrey because there would be witnesses soon and that would play a part. He moved instead to take Sansa by the elbow, carefully, not to startle, and to get her away from the rawest of the blood. "You are safe," he said, and heard how insufficient it was. "You," Joffrey began, pointing with his uninjured hand, already knitting the story in his head to cover the gap where courage should have been. "You, she." He ran out of pronouns and spit blood and pried together into the grass. The reeds tore. Sandor was there with 2 of the king's guard, white cloaks damp and thus far from their ideal. The hound's eyes swept and catalogued. Blood and its source, predator and its trail, the absence of the second wolf, the boy with a bleeding arm and the boy standing too calm beside him. "What in 7 fires?" he growled. "The girl set her beast on me?" Joffrey gasped, seizing the line he saw before him, the one that made the world coherent. "That little wretch and her butcher's boy. The butcher's boy runs north and will outrun you on this ground," the hound observed almost lazily. "Shall I chase him for sport, my prince? Or shall we tie up your pretty arm so your mother doesn't faint at the sight of her prince's veins?" His voice made even the sewing of a bandage a threat. He nodded at one of the guards to fetch cloth. Sansa looked at Jon with a heart like glass, transparent and therefore at risk of shattering. He could not take the choice from her. "Say what you saw," he told her quietly. "Only what you saw." She opened her mouth and shut it and opened it again, and the first thing out was not choice but habit. I don't know," she said, soft as rain, and he could not tell if she was lying to save herself or if what she had seen had already fled from her mind in terror. Arya did not run toward the camp. She went for the river's far curve, ghosting the line of the bank as if she had studied it in her sleep. Jon saw her once more through damp leaves, flinging her arms around Nymeria's neck, speaking into the wolf's ear in a rush that was both apology and command. The dire wolf looked back exactly once, then broke away with a quickness that seemed to remove her from the world rather than move her within it. Arya watched her go and did the cruel thing necessity demanded. Picked up a stone and threw it after her, a second stone and a third, until the wolf's pace did not change at the insult and the world had been transformed into a place where loving something required one to wound it for its own safety. Jon did not follow her. He was needed here. The hound lifted Joffrey as if he weighed no more than his vanity and carried him, bleeding and swearing, toward the king. The guards spilled out behind like coins a man had lost from his purse in haste. Sansa came because there was nothing else for her to do. Jon went because this was the shape of responsibility, ugly and exacting. The hearing, or the piece of theater that wanted to be won, was held under the king's awning while rain ticked on the canvas like small fingers. Robert sat with his head in his hand and a cup he had not yet brought to his mouth. Cersei stood, because her disdain would not sit for any man, and because standing allowed the line of her neck to be a weapon. Joffrey dripped blood and anger. The hound's expression was the tired contempt of a man who has seen too many versions of the same stupidity and can count them by smell. "Your son was wounded," Cersei said, though the blood spoke louder than she did. "By a wolf and by a Stark." "By a wolf," Robert corrected, his voice rough with the effort of being judicious before wine. "We'll have the girl here and ask her, and—" "She ran," Cersei announced, making the verb an indictment. "Guilt flees. That little savage sent her beast to tear the prince. She struck him herself." She put a hand to her son's hair. Whether she meant comfort or the appearance of it, the gesture made Joffrey taller, if not better. "She hit me with a stick," Joffrey said. The word stick made to carry all the shame he could not bear. "The butcher boy struck me too." "Fetch the Stark girl," Robert ordered, impatient and already irritated with the sensation of being asked to father when he wanted to be asked to eat and hunt. "And the butcher's boy. The butcher's boy runs," the hound said, and in the saying of it there was a small line of interest, a suggestion that the game still had a shape worth playing. "He runs well. He'll run worse with a horse behind him." Jon said nothing. In his mouth were a dozen truths which would not serve Sansa, Arya, or Micah. He kept them there and let them turn like millstones grinding down wheat into usable flour. They found Arya because she chose to be found. They did not find Nymeria because Arya had chosen that too. She came wet and defiant and mud-streaked, with hair that had clotted around her face and a mouth set to take blows and not let them define her. Sansa stood beside Joffrey like a tall candle. She looked at Arya with both a sister's longing and a novice courtier's fear. The air between them was full of knives neither knew how to put down without cutting themselves. "Tell it," Robert commanded. Arya told it. She used a child's terms, which is to say the correct ones stripped of courtly grease. Joffrey told it, making himself a hero in his own telling because that was how he understood narrative to function. Sansa said very little. When pressed, she said the words that made Robert close his eyes as if a fly had flown into them. "I don't remember," she said, and Jon saw the single hair-thin fracture that line would put in the bridge between sisters. He could almost hear the river of their lives running under it, testing, widening. Cersei did not wait for justice. She asked for revenge, which is a simpler dish to serve. "Where is the beast?" she demanded. "Where is the wolf? We cannot have wolves snapping at princes without teaching them what happens when they taste royal blood." "The wolf's gone," the hound said, a small admiration hidden in the flatness of his voice. "Then the other," Cersei said at once, eyes on Sansa with particular relish. "The girl's wolf, the girl who cannot remember. Let her remember this. A dog that bites a prince is put down. A wolf that is allied to the bite is the same as a tooth." "No," Sansa breathed, disbelieving that words could shape reality so immediately, as if the air should have resisted them on principle. "No, she did nothing. Lady never. She is gentle, she would never—" "Enough!" Robert pushed up out of his chair as if the gravity of the situation offended him. "Gods, woman, must you be so bloody-minded? The girl's wolf did not bite anyone." "The wolf is a wolf," Cersei returned. The surface of her voice did not ripple. "You will not have your subjects ask whether princes can be bitten and the beasts kept. It makes questions, and questions make men think themselves brave." "Robert," Ned said quietly. He stood forward not as a vassal asking a favor, but as a man offering another a way to keep his own face. "If the price must be paid, let it be paid by my hand. Not by yours. Not by your queen's guards." He looked at Sansa, and his eyes, which had held armies calm, shook just once. For mercy's sake, he said, which was not an argument but a vow. Sansa made a sound that was not a sob and not yet the absence of one. She looked at Jon, and he did not lie to her with his eyes. He only inclined his head, which meant, "Your father will be as gentle as the world allows." It also meant, "The world will allow little." They took Lady away in a hush that was more awful than shouting. The wolf went with her head high, because wolves do not comprehend why men would call mercy that which deprives a pack of one of its heartbeats. Jon walked at Ned's shoulder, not because he could or should help, but because men ought not go to such work alone if they do not have to. Ghost padded behind, silent, pale, a warning and a witness. Ned knelt, and the kneeling made him smaller to the outside eye but larger in every other respect. Lady lay with her mouth closed as if waiting on a word that would never come. Ned's hand was very steady. He did not speak to make himself feel better. He did not speak at all. Ghost's eyes went very dark, and the long whip of his tail thumped once, unwillingly, on the ground. Jon put his hand over his wolf's neck and felt the life there, the warm engine, the promise. When it was done, it was done. There is a kind of silence that follows such things which even crows respect. None came to the bright spill on the grass. Ned cleaned the blade with care. He put a hand on Lady's flank and left it there one long moment, an offering to no god in particular. He stood up and looked older by half a winter. They went back to camp through the thinned rain. Sansa had been taken to her tent by a woman with a face that could smooth linens with a glance. Arya sat in the shadows under a cart with her arms around her knees. She had the expression of someone who has swallowed a stone. Jon went there first. He crouched on his heels and did not reach out to touch her until her body gave him the permission of a small tilt, a lean. Then he put his arm around her and let her press her face into the damp cloth of his sleeve like a child who knows she would be humiliated by being called one. "It was my fault," she said into his arm, and the voice was a rawness. "It was the world's fault," he said, "and the prince's, for being cruel when he could have been kind. I should have bitten him harder. That too." She laughed, small and furious. "If Ghost had." "Ghost did not," Jon said, "and I am glad." He thought of the Hound's plain counsel. Keep a tree at your back. He thought of what it would mean if Ghost ever had the taste of a prince in his mouth. "He would pay a price you and I could not bear." Arya lifted her head. Her eyes were the color of the sky when it has decided to snow. "I made Nymeria go," she said. "I hurt her so she would go. I hate me." "You did what a leader does," Jon said. "You did a hard thing for the safety of another. Leaders hate themselves most of the time. It is how the work gets done." He brushed damp hair off her forehead, the gesture surprising them both with how natural it was. "She will live. She will run. Her pups will run. She will teach the wild that men's hooks have barbs. That is something you have done." She pressed her mouth thin, absorbing it, not forgiving the world or herself, only lodging the fact somewhere she could call for it later when need demanded. That night, the rain seemed to hold its breath along with the camp. A raven came before dawn, a soaked bundle of hunger and duty, and beat against the strings of a tent as if it could be near to the message it carried by touch. They brought it to Ned while the cook fire was still sulking and the king's tent still heavy with the labored sleep of a man who wishes never to wake truly. Jon stood in the awning's dimness and watched his father untie the little scroll and smooth it. He recognized Maester Luwin's tidy hand even from a distance. It looked like a man sweeping snow from a stoop. Robb Stark's name appeared in the first lines and brands, and the words knifed out of the quiet with no ceremony. A man with a blade in the night, a fire lit to draw servants away, the boy saved by the white wolf that had lain beneath his bed since the fall, the wolf going for the throat and making an end of it, the knife left behind strange and beautiful Valyrian steel, dragonbone hilt, an expensive tool for cheap killing. There was more, but the shape was there. Ghost's head rose slowly, as if the message had given off a smell he could not ignore. Catelyn had not slept, or if she had, the sleep had been thin enough to break at the first hint of a bird. She came at Jory's gesture and took the scroll in silence from Ned's hand. Her face did not change at first. Then it did, not by twisting but by emptying. She was a woman who had learned to hold a castle with her breath and eyes. This news went at that foundation like floodwater, patient and indisputable. "I ride north," she said. She did not plead. She did not ask permission. She simply made the statement, the way a queen might to a council whose job it is to make her will possible. Ned did not argue. He had never been a man to put his own terror in a woman's path. "Take Roderick," he said. "Take men you trust. Do not ride alone." "I will take Roderick," she agreed. "I will take men. I will take this." She lifted the scroll slightly. "I will take what we are to the place where our son is, and I will stand in the doorway and not let the dark past me again." She looked at Jon then, the look measured rather than cruel, as if he were a sum to be checked against a figure in her mind. "You will watch them," she said, meaning the girls, meaning the man she loved and the man she did not. "I will," Jon said. She accepted that with a small nod and left to gather what she needed for a swift departure. She and Tyrion Lannister passed one another under the camp's edge as the dwarf made preparations to go north. They did not exchange words. Their glances touched and skittered off like flint that sparks but does not catch. They marked one another anyway, and the road itself, cleverer than men, made a note of it. On the third day after the ford, the rain loosened and then wandered away to make trouble for someone else. The road grew busier. The last long roll of hill let the city appear not all at once but in bands. The brown sprawl of roofs like scales, the intermittent flash of water where the Blackwater curled, the great red shoulders of the keep set on its hill as if it had grown there like a hard fruit. The air had a different stink, human and fish, smoke and spice, the smell of stones that have been heated over and over and have lost patience. The king sat straighter in his saddle when he saw the walls and then slumped, as a man might in the doorway of a house he loves and can no longer call home. Cersei's mouth relaxed into the serenity of a woman who had been born to the power of rooms. Jaime laughed with a brother's private humor at the way the city did what it always did to his twins' eyes, softened them and brightened them both. Ned's jaw set. He did not hate cities. He simply did not trust places where a man's distance to the horizon could be measured in rooms rather than miles. He gathered his household with a look. Jon felt the pull of it like a hand in the small of his back. Ghost lifted his head to taste the city's breath and sneezed, affronted. The dire wolf was not afraid of many things. Odor itself was one of them. They entered at the gate of the gods under eyes that had measured men all their lives and learned little from it. Sellswords leaned and watched the parade of nobility pass, as if considering a stew of which they could not afford the meat. The streets pinched and then widened. The press of small folk buckled and flowed. Urchins ran between wheels like clever foxes traveling in a flock of sheepdogs. Sansa sat very straight and looked as if this were exactly as the world should be, an endless stage set to receive her. Arya pressed her lips together and saw not stages but exits. They climbed Aegon's high hill and came into the Red Keep's court where a line of servants waited like the punctuation at the end of a long sentence. Varys glided at the edge of vision and made himself noticed exactly as much as he wished to be. Littlefinger stood where the best vantage met the least obligation, smiling a fraction so that he could deny it later. Renly Baratheon laughed with sunlight in his hair and clapped his brother's back as if youth were a coin he could spend and never run out. Jon took rooms with the rest of Ned's men in a place that had clearly been built by men who thought about kitchens first. His cell had an arched window that looked into a courtyard where a sour orange tree was trying to decide whether to live. He put his cloak on the peg, his few books on the shelf, and his hand on Ghost's neck almost without thought. The dire wolf turned once in the room like a wind, checking all corners, and lay down so that his chin could rest on the threshold, master of what went in and out. Ned went to the small council with a face that a man would want on the other side of a siege. Jon was not invited. He did not expect to be. He stood instead near the door with Jory Castle because the dignity of not being invited requires a man to stand taller than longing. Through the wooden mass, sound slunk out. He heard Renly's smooth amusement, Barristan Selmy's patient dignity, Varys's fuzzy courtesy that covered knives, Littlefinger's words that chose not to be pinned to meanings until after they had done their work. He heard 2 numbers, some so large that their syllables sounded like boasts. Debts to Lannisters and to this banker and that guild, ships paid for twice and painted twice to look new once. 7 hells, Ned said afterward, less to the corridor than to the life that had pushed him into it. There is not a coin minted that we have not promised to a man we do not like. Jon did not answer with comfort. He offered water and silence, both of which can be drunk. Arya was called to a room that smelled of cedar and olive oil and was asked to stand straight and move her hands, asked to forget all the rules that made life bearable, to drop her shoulders, to become a reed that did not mind being bent. The man who told her these things was small and brown and had a head that seemed too wise for a body that should by rights belong to a fisherman. He named himself Syrio Farrell, and he did not flatter, which made Arya trust him even as he irritated her. Jon watched from the doorway. Syrio saw him at once because that is what was required to be Syrio. He smiled and shook his head, amused in a way that put men's pride to sleep. "You stand like a wall," he told Jon. "Good for taking spears, bad for moving out of the way." "I have taken a spear in training," Jon said. "Then you see my point," Syrio replied. "Come, girl, faster. Forget about lions. Remember water." Arya repeated words under her breath as if they were spells that would work even if she did not believe in sorcery. She loved and hated each correction in equal measure. The first time she moved correctly without thinking, the Bravusi did not praise her. He simply nodded, and something like pride bubbled up in her, hot and secret. Joffrey came into the yard later with Sandor behind him the way weather follows a pressure drop. The prince's arm wore clean bandage by then. He held it slightly away from his body as if to make sure all saw what he had suffered. He stopped and watched Arya practice, and his mouth twisted in that way it had when he had not planned to smile and could not help it. "Teaching the little savage to wave a stick," he observed. Syrio did not look at him. "To listen," he said. "Which is harder?" Joffrey's eyes found Jon. "You keep a beast and a stick girl," he said. "How northern." His tone made northern mean uncouth, which was partly true and thus inelegant as an insult. Jon, who had kept his single mouth closed when the world itched for him to use it, found himself speaking anyway. "Perhaps, my prince," he said, polite to the edge of mockery, "you might find a teacher of listening also. I think your counselors would pay from their own purses." Sandor laughed, short and low. Joffrey's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, as if scenting a challenge that could be shaped into something he could win. He had learned from the Hound, if only that a fight starts with feet, and his were set well. Jon's hand did not rest on his sword. His entire body was made of the choice to be a wall, to refuse the invitation. "My father is the hand," he added, too quietly to be easily quoted. "If you strike at me, you strike at him. Do not offer the queen more instruments than she already plays." "Bold words," Joffrey said. "From a... what are you?" He made his face artfully blank. "Remind me what one calls you." "A northerner," Jon said, and did not blink. "I can call him something better," Arya said, forgetting Syrio and her feet and everything but contempt, which was always too fast for her. "Brother." Syrio sighed and tapped her ankle with a stick in reprimand for the lapse. It was enough to pull her back toward discipline. Joffrey flicked his gaze to the Hound. The Hound lifted one shoulder in the smallest of shrugs, which could be interpreted by anyone in any way and be correct. "Come," Joffrey said at last, suddenly bored. "I want to see the kennels. I want a new dog." The last words were thrown like scraps toward Arya and Jon, which was too clumsy a cruelty to wound deeply. He went, and the Hound with him. Syrio returned to his girl and her fury, sculpting it into something that might one day resemble grace. Sansa did not come to the yard that day. She was with the queen in a room where the windows looked out at a piece of garden disciplined into geometry. Cersei poured her wine as if it were tea and asked her questions that were not questions. How she slept, what songs she sang to herself, to measure how pliable she was, how far her spine could bend without snapping. Sansa answered each as if an exam whose answers could be correct if she found the shape of correctness. The queen's hand touched hers just once, lightly, as if the girl were a harp string that could be plucked for a note. That night, Littlefinger placed himself in Ned's path as if he were a stepping stone the hand could not avoid. "Lord Stark," he said with that indolent courtesy that suggested he had been owed this chance for years. "If ever you have need of seeing what is not meant to be seen, I know windows." He smiled sadly or slyly. They looked the same. There are also doors, of course, but doors have hinges and hinges creak. Ned stared at him with that special cold he kept for men who believed themselves indispensable because they could open boxes of mischief. "If I need to look in through a window," he said, "I will ask a cat. They make less noise and owe fewer men." "So do I," Littlefinger said, flicking the lie like a seal on a letter. "But as you like." His eyes slid to Jon and back, calculating, as if adding up a column of figures and discovering a number he had not expected. "You brought a new piece to the board. Interesting." "He is not a piece," Ned said. "He is a man." "Men can be pieces," Littlefinger said gently, as if correcting a child's misconception about the world. "That is what makes the game worth playing." He bowed with an exactness that was almost mockery and disappeared in the polite manner of a man who is certain he can appear again wherever he pleases. Ghost learned the Red Keep as a wolf learns a thicket, by smell, by sound, by the underfoot tilt of floors, until he could travel at pace in the dark and know which turns led back to where there was bread and which led to where air tasted like secrets. He stood sometimes at Jon's threshold and stared into the corridor as if he knew someone stood silently beyond it. Once Jon opened the door fast and found only a page with a tray. The boy looked terrified and then, seeing Jon's face, was not unkind, placated, and then terrified again to see the wolf's teeth in a yawn. Varys sent a basket of sugared orange peel and a note that smelled faintly of lavender. The note said nothing in particular, which made it say too much. Jory found Jon a man to drill with in the yard when they had the hours. The fellow was a Tyroshi with a bald head and a beard that looked like a red-fletched arrow. He fought with a long sword as if it were or steady, rending, uninterested in flourish. Jon liked him because he never fainted. He simply came like weather and expected the other man to decide whether to be a tree or a boat. Jon learned how to be both without being broken. Once, Barristan Selmy watched for the length of 2 passes and said, "Keep your wrists kind. Don't make them do all the work of shoulders. You will have need of them when you are old if you are lucky enough to have them at all." "I will heed it," Jon said, and meant it. There was a peace in the yard work, sweat running the inaccuracies out of a man's body the way a river cleans stones. He kept Ghost with him whenever he could. The dire wolf disliked the city's press but loved the yard's open place. He sat with his head up and the men gave him a berth because they were not fools. At night, the Red Keep pressed closer. Its corridors had too many turns and more doors than any one purpose required, and the tapestries were thick enough to have futures woven into them. Jon walked in the hours when drink loosened other men from themselves and left the halls thin and susceptible to footfalls. Once he found a door that breathed cold, as if the winter he had left had been folded and put there, and he stood with his hand inches from the iron and felt as if he were at the crypt again, waiting for a voice that never comes. He let it alone. Another time he followed a scratching and found only a cat as black as a coal scuttle, yellow-eyed and disdainful, its ear torn and healed into a ragged coin. It stared at Ghost and Ghost stared back, and the 2 creatures seemed to understand something about each other that men could not learn. Letters came, and with them obligations put into words. From Winterfell, Robb wrote a restrained account of a day's 20 indignities. Freemen demanding the right to hunt where the lords would rather lay their snares, a mason fallen from a scaffold, a sow that had refused to farrow until the midwife had sung to it while drunk. Beneath these ran the current. Bran stillness, Bran stillness, Bran breathes, Bran wakes not, Bran breathes again. Catelyn wrote less. Her ink had the tightness of a fist. Once she wrote only, "He woke and slept again. He spoke a word, no word. He lives." It was both everything and not enough. From the wall, no raven had yet come. Tyrion would be there by now, belly full of stories, hands cold, eyes amused by the way men make themselves small against the cold and then pretend they are mighty. Jon imagined him peering over the edge of the world and thinking it a particularly clever jest. He imagined Benjen there, gravity holding him differently, as if the wall altered men's weight. Arya grew better. Even her impatience got precision. Syrio stood sometimes behind her and closed his eyes and listened to her feet, choosing not to look so that his ears would tell him what his eyes might flatter. Sansa grew quieter. The queen draped her with attentions. Women with smooth hands corrected her with affection. Sansa wrote to her mother in words that had been brushed until they shone. She did not write about nightmares. She did not write about the sudden absence of warmth at her feet in the night where a wolf should have been. Once Jon found her sitting on a stair, holding a piece of lady's old collar folded into her palm as if the leather could have stored some breath. He sat beside her. He said nothing. After a while she said, "She was so gentle, Jon." "She was," he said. "The world will try to make you think gentleness is a fault. It is not. It is a choice made over and over." "Why do men always choose the other thing?" she asked, fierce for a heartbeat. "We are tired," he said, "and because cruelty promises quick answers. We are fools enough to buy those." She looked at him then without scorn, which was perhaps the first time, and her mouth shaped a question she did not ask. He could not have answered it if she had. Once, in the yard where Jon had learned the habits of his own body, Jaime Lannister stood with a sword across his forearm like a cat with a toy. He watched the Winterfell men and smiled that small satisfied smile which was as much a part of his face as his nose. He flicked his wrist and the steel turned and came to rest point down, balanced on the leather as if it had learned a parlor trick. "You train decently," he told Jon when their eyes met. "It would be a pity if you learned to fight like a northern gate. Strong and obvious and easy to go around." "Gates keep men out," Jon said. "And in," Jaime rejoined pleasantly. "Do not be a gate for another man's plan. Be a door. Doors move." "You speak as if all of life were architecture." "It is," Jaime said. "Designs, supports, failures in the foundation. A man who thinks he can build anything with only straight lines is a fool. But then, most men are." He tilted his head. "If you had a crest, Snow, what would it be? A white wolf on a field of silence." "I have no crest," Jon said. "I have a sword and a father who asked me to see with both eyes." "Keep the second thing," Jaime advised. "Swords grow bored when they are not flattered. Eyes do not." He left, the white of his cloak making the dust look cheap. Jon watched him and did not learn anything he wanted to be true, but did learn it anyway. He stored the lesson beside the hound's bluntness and Sirio's water and Ned's quiet. Ned himself became a man in motion. He went to the council chamber and the king's rooms and the city's counting house and the yard where hiring is done by men who use words like stones thrown into a pond. He listened more than he spoke because he had promised himself he would. When he spoke, his words were exact. He lost battles and won some too, small ones, the kind that keep a man from going to bed thinking he should cut his own heart out to save everyone else the trouble. One evening, he came back late and ghosted into Jon's room without knocking, which meant either news too heavy for courtesy or a tenderness so tired it forgot the rules. He sat on the edge of the little table as if it were a dock with a boat rocking nearby. "There is filth here," he said, "stuck to everything. Men will call it politics and speak of it as if it were made of noble necessities. It is filth. The king is a boy who grew big. The queen is a girl who cut herself growing and kept the shards. Varys wants to be safe in the most complicated way possible. Littlefinger wants to be clever to the end of time. And you," Jon said. Ned looked at the white wolf and then at the boy and looked away. "I want the North to know the seasons," he said. "I want men to eat and sleep and not sell their daughters because a brewer told them he could make their sons princes. I want you to hold your tongue until it is necessary to give it up." "I have," Jon said. "It is a piece of me I intend to keep until I must buy something worth more than myself with it." Ned's hand came up and hovered over Jon's head as if it meant to rest there and then thought better of it. "If the world asks you to spend yourself," he said, "ask the world what it offers in return, and do not let it trick you with grand words. Ask for bread. Ask for the name of a child you will save." He stood. He looked as if he would say more. He did not. He went away to his wife's absence and his king's presence and the beds where neither of those things made a man sleep good. Day by day, the city taught Jon its moods. At dawn, it was hungry, patient, calculating. At noon, it was distracted by itself. At night, it was either drunk or praying or both. He learned where the air was sweet and where it was an insult. He learned which stairs had stones that would try to slip under a man's boot and trip him, as if masonry could be bribed. He learned the sound of rain on the red keeps different roofs like a set of instruments, a rattle on slate, a hush on lead, a sibilance on tile. He learned that Ghost could not abide the fish market and that Ghost loved the butcher's lane disproportionately and that the direwolf's restraint, which kept his teeth from men's throats and his body from trouble, was a bond between them that had to be fed with words and looks like a tether fed with oil. News trickled like a faucet that had never been fixed. From the north, a raven that said Bran had woken again and opened his eyes and looked at his mother and said not a word anyone could hear. From the wall, another that said winter had not yet decided to begin. From the Vale, a whisper that Lisa Arryn wore fear like a scarf, winding it and unwinding it depending on whether she liked the look of the day. Jon kept the fragments as if one day they might assemble into a map. Sometimes, in the mornings when the city misted and the red keep's stones breathed out the night's cool, he went to the highest place he was allowed and looked out toward the narrow sea's slice. The horizon line steadied him. It said, "There are still straight lines in the world that are not made by men." It said, "Ships move in two elements wills and yet often reach their shore." Once a gull went by so close it seemed to eye Ghost and measure how much wolf there was in the wolf. The bird decided against investigation. Ghost watched it go with the mild contempt of creatures that never need to invent flight because they can already be in any place they decide to be. He did not forget the wall. It sat behind his thoughts like a mountain beyond another mountain. He imagined men there stamping their feet and telling stories they pretended not to care about. He imagined the wind speaking truth too plainly and men pretending they did not understand the language. He imagined Benjen looking down from that appalling height, counting lives as points of light in a sea of dark, and then turning away because to look too long at distance tugs something in a man's chest loose. One noon, when the city had gone quiet for lack of breeze and even the beggars had arranged themselves under awnings like laundry, a message came not to Ned but to Jon, and it was only a few words on a small piece of parchment. "The girl's dancing master is more dangerous than he looks." The hand was careful. The hand belonged to no one he knew. He folded it and put it away. He went to the yard where Syrio had Arya moving through blocks of air as if cutting invisible cloth, and he watched the man's feet. He saw that Syrio's shoes never seemed to grip. They floated and then decided. "Who gives you your coin?" Jon asked once when the teacher dismissed the girl and she ran on a necessary errand to steal her own apple. Syrio lifted his eyebrows a fraction. "A man who wishes his daughter to be alive in a city that prefers its girls decorative. That is not an answer. It is the true one." Jon accepted it and gave Ghost a scratch that meant, "Trust, but count the exits." The city itself had exits, though few men knew them. Beneath the red keep ran ways cut when dragons lived, and the air down there remembered heat. Jon learned one by accident when a servant dropped a key and it rolled under a shelf and he moved the shelf to be helpful. He learned another because Ghost shoveled his nose under a carpet with all the grace of a boar and pulled it up to reveal a trapdoor as pleased as a child with a frog. He did not go far into those places. He marked them. He watched the walls for the breath lines where a door becomes merely a wall again and thought, "Someone will need this." He did not imagine that someone would be him. He had learned the vanity of such imagining. The king hunted and came back from the hunt wearing blood that was not his and laughter that might have been. He gave the city a feast and Cersei a glance. He gave Ned a headache. He gave Jon a nod at a distance once, as if seeing the boy were a relief he did not intend to admit. Robert had a vast heart and a short attention, which is a poor pairing for kingship. Men came to bow and stayed to put coins in the coin bowl that had replaced Honor's store. When Jon slept, he sometimes dreamed of the crypts, which had been inevitable even before the message of knives and wolves. He dreamed of the dead sitting up on their stone beds and laying their iron swords flat across their knees, accommodating, ready to listen as if to say, "We have time, boy, speak." He did not speak. He woke with the heaviness in his chest that only the north could post by raven. One evening as the sun fell into the river and turned it into a strip of beaten copper, Jon walked the city's outer walk with Jory and two of the men, their swords not so much for show as for balance. A boy ran by with a basket of oysters that smelled clean. A woman hummed a tune that sounded like the place she had been born. From a wine cellar's doorway, a tall, dark-haired smith glanced up just once at Jon, then away, shy or wary by nature. Jon glanced at his arms and the angle at which he held his left shoulder and the way his chin set when he looked at the keep and thought, "This one has a father he does not name." He did not linger over it. He stored it also. The world had begun offering him details the way a negligent patron offers coins on a plate, some bent, some true. When they came back up through the gates, he saw Jaime again at the end of a corridor with a lamp in his hand. The lamp made the white of the cloak gold. The king's brother turned it absently, as if he had been looking at something that wasn't there. "Snow," he said, tasting the name as if it were a fruit he had held to ripen and now found surprisingly edible. "Does your father sleep?" "He tries," Jon said. "Tell him to try harder," Jaime said. "There is nothing he can do awake that he cannot be blamed for in the morning." His mouth curved and he took himself and his lamp and his too many meanings away. Jon found Ned at his table with the map of the city laid out and small stones. He had gathered himself to mark men and matters and possibilities. He had always preferred pebbles to carved counters. He said they remembered the weight of the river that had polished them and thus kept a man honest. He looked up when Jon entered and, without preamble, told him the thing that had been gnawing at him. The last hand died not of a fever or a slipped step. He died because men wanted him dead. "If I poke at that, they will want me dead too." "And you mean to poke?" Jon said. "I mean to wash my hands and not find them clean," Ned answered. "When that happens, I will know where to look." He scrubbed his fingers as if the thought itself left dirt under his nails. "If the day comes when it is clear that the cost of knowing is counted in those I brought with me, and if I cannot keep you safe inside these walls, I will send you away." "Back north," Jon said, the words a strange hearth in his mouth. "No," Ned said. "Away." He looked toward the window where the last of the light drew a line. "There are doors in this place. I trust 3 men to know them. I will tell Jory where they are. If we must use them, we will use them." He looked back to Jon, and his gaze was as cold and kind as a clear morning. "I will not waste your life to prove a lesson the city refuses to learn." Jon thought of the doors Ghost had found, and that he too had found, because perhaps there are things a pack knows that men do not. "I will be ready," he said. "Pray we do not have to be," Ned replied. He rubbed at his forehead, and the lines there seemed to remember both youth and age at once. Night thickened. The keep breathed. In one of its rooms, a girl with copper hair dreamed of forgiveness she would never be offered by the people she wished would give it. In another, a girl with tangle black hair dreamed of a place where the ground moved under her and she did not fall. A queen lay awake and counted the people who would do as she asked. A king snored, a sound like an old bell. In a wine-sour alley, a man spoke to another of a debt and a favor and of a knife that had been beautifully made. In a tower's shadow, a boy worked a piece of gold into the shape of a bird for a woman who had been kind to him. Under the floor of the world, where fire had once been fed by meat that had flown, the skulls of dragons considered everyone's breath and held their counsel. Jon sat with Ghost's head in his lap and rubbed the scar under his ear where a prickle had once taken root. The direwolf's eyes closed to slits. The air shifted, the slight way it does when a thought arrives from far away. He did not know yet that the thought would come with a name attached. He knew only that something was adjusting itself like a man settling to his seat before standing up to say something that would not be unsaid. He rested his hand on the wolf and felt that the beat inside the animal was a drum that had found the measure of his. He closed his eyes a moment and imagined snow falling against a wall and sticking. In the morning, a raven came. It wore the look of all ravens, hungry, offended by weather superior to men. The message on its leg was not long. No message that matters is. Jon was there when Ned broke the seal because men should witness the turning points of their own lives. The writing was clean and certain. Bran had spoken. He had woken long enough to say, as simply as a child who understands that naming is a kind of magic. They pushed me. The words were the size of pebbles. They hit the surface of the day and sent rings moving out, elegant and unstoppable. Ned closed his eyes. When he opened them again, he was already in a different day. "Do you see?" he asked Jon quietly. "I do," Jon said. He thought of a golden cloak. He thought of hands on a window. He thought of how far a boy can fall and live, and he wondered if gods or luck dislike that sort of accident more than men do. "Then we will ask the city for its truth," Ned said. "And if it gives us only lies, we will take the trouble to go round them." "Take me with you," Jon said. Automatic, the impulse rising the way heat rises from a smith's brazier. Ned shook his head, once. For listening, yes. For questions, yes. For standing, always. For the first knocking at doors where men keep tigers, not this time. He set the message down and pressed his palm flat on it, as if to keep it from flying away. "You will keep the girls near. You will keep your eyes open, both of them. You will find out how a man with nothing to do all day fills his day and learn how not to do that. You will be what you came to be." Jon nodded. He had asked. He could not be a child and ask again. He watched his father take up his cloak and the step that changed him into Lord Stark where the household could see it. He watched him go. He felt very distinctly the city turn its head. Ghost raised his lips rippling to show the white straight teeth. He did not growl. He breathed out, a sound that might have been the way wolves pray. Jon laid his hand on the thick fur again and thought. A blade is sharpened by the most ordinary things, stone and time and patience. He would be a blade sharpened by such things. He would look like bread and water and wait until bread and water turned into iron in the mouth of a man who meant him harm. He strapped on his sword. He went to the girls, one after the other, and found them at their two poles. Sansa arranging a ribbon as if the job warranted an audience of saints. Arya balancing on a low wall with her arms out as if any day ought to ask her to cross a wild river. He did not speak of knives or windows. He adjusted the tilt of a bow instead. He corrected the angle of a shoe. He told an assassin's story that pretended to be a joke so that laughter would teach a lesson sorrow could not. He stayed close, and when there were other things to be done, he went as far as a man can go and still call his position near. That afternoon, as heat settled at its laziest and the red keep drowsed, he walked past a tapestry he had walked past 36 times and saw at last the small shift that made a picture tell a different story. A fold where there had been none, a line where the warp and weft had learned a new trick. He did not touch it. He did not look around as if spooked. He walked on and came back an hour later and sat where he could watch without watching. An hour after that, a shadow moved and did not. The wall breathed. He let it. He made a note and put it with the others until his mind was a page stippled with small marks. A map a man could use if he had to flee his own house and come back to it in a different skin. At dusk, the wind came in off the river and folded itself around the towers. It smelled, just for a heartbeat, like far snow. Jon looked up and thought of Winterfell's smoke laying itself against the sky. He thought of Benjen on a wall built by men and perhaps by something else, and of Tyrion squinting into the white and turning a joke into a little fire. He thought of a boy named Micah, of a wolf named Lady, of another running where men did not hunt, of girls learning the two kinds of courage the world requires of women. To speak, and to keep silent when silence is a weapon pointed in the right direction. He went to bed late, when the city had already begun telling itself the lies it uses to sleep. He lay with Ghost at his feet and sleep came, not in a rush, but in a thick, even fall, like the first good snow on fields that have waited for it. In his last waking moment he heard what he had heard before, the sound of a decision being made elsewhere that would walk to him with its hand raised and its palm open, asking not to shake hands but to take something. He set his jaw in his sleep. He dreamed of doors and of water. He dreamed, too, of the crypt and of a girl in stone with flowers at her knees turning her head, not to speak but to listen, as if he had finally learned to say the thing the dead have been waiting for the living to say. I know. I will stand. I will keep watch. The message did not shout. It sat on the table and made other things quiet. Ned stood a long time with his hand on it. His face was no more expressive than before, but the jaw had set in that way that told Jon the man beneath the Lord was forcing himself to be patient with a universe that did not deserve the courtesy. They brought a map because men feel better with maps, and put stones on the places where a path might run. Ned moved one from the Street of Steel to the Alchemist's Guild Hall and back again, as if it represented more than weight on paper. Jon Arryn visited here, he said, tapping the citadel smooth corner of one plinth with a knuckle. And here, and again, the scribe writes that the Lord Hand asked for the Book of Lineages. Did he find a name he did not expect? Jon asked. He found a pattern, Ned said. Patterns are the dangerous thing. Names can be excused. He went to Pycelle first, because old men who have lived among secrets for 50 years often do not notice when they have begun handing them out in exchange for the sound of their own wisdom. Jon walked behind him and watched the maester's chamber gather them in. A room fat with scrolls, with a lily rotting gorgeously in a vase, with chain links winking like resignations along the old man's throat. Pycelle rose as slowly as a curtain in a damp theater. His beard spilled across his chest in a snowdrift. His mouth underneath it had that soft, smug weariness men get when other people's vigor offends them. Lord Stark, he breathed, making each syllable a reminder that he still had air and therefore importance. And you must be the son. He did not give Jon the courtesy of the bastard's name. Leaving it absent made the distance neat. Ned did not correct him. We would see Mallion's book, he said. The lineages and histories. Pycelle sighed as if he had been asked to fetch a bucket from a well that had frozen and been covered over with paving stones. So many come for it, he mourned. So few understand it. He tottered to a shelf and drew it down with hands made for carrying lighter things. The book itself had learned arrogance. It creaked and offered up its pages the way a noblewoman gives her hand, to be kissed, not held. They laid it open on the table. Names marched, precise and dry, wives and seed and sigils like footnoted arguments. Jon watched Ned's finger travel. Here, Ned said when his own patterned shoulders began to show. Steffan Baratheon, black of hair, and his father, and his father's father, and his uncle's sons, black, black, black. He turned another page. Everywhere, when a Cupid's bow mouth and a storm god's temper make a child, the hair goes black. Grand Maester Malion was a great man, Pycelle crooned, as if praising the book could somehow place him near the birth of all the children in it. He saw how seed runs strong in some lines. They say Lord Arryn asked you for this, Ned said. Did he ask for anything else? Pycelle's eyes went distant with the pleasure of being consulted about the dead. He asked after a boy, the old man said, an apprentice at a smith. I told him such things were beneath the concern of hands and kings. He told me that he would decide what was beneath his concern. Ned shut the book very gently. We will see the boy, he said. The Street of Steel smells the same in any city. Hot iron and work. It licks a man's face the way a dog does. A little rough, enthusiastic, honest. They found the armorer whose name had traveled to Ned with the book. Tobo Moat, a man with hands that looked as if they had been carved for beauty before being dragooned into function. His shop had steel laid out like music. The best pieces did not call attention to themselves. They took the light and sat with it contentedly. The boy was big, not grown, but with the promise of it written on the long bones and the thickness of the wrists. His hair was black, his eyes blue, and there was something in the set of his brow that felt like déjà vu. He came out wiping his hands on a rag and stopped without being told to when he saw lords and wolves at his master's front. What is your name? Ned asked him. Gendry, the boy said, wary but not frightened. Who paid your apprenticeship? Ned asked Moat. Moat's eyes slid. He loved his craft more than his clients, which meant he did not love his clients at all. A man from the royal household, he said. Sealed purse. He wanted the boy placed well and kept from the notice of men with stars on their chests. The king's hand before me, Ned said. It was not a question. Moat inclined his head a fraction, as far as he could without letting pride slip off and break. Could be. Ned turned to the boy again. Your mother. She died, Gendry said. His jaw tightened. He had the look of boys who have learned to hate pity on the first bite and never found it to improve with chewing. Did you see your father? Ned asked, while Jon watched the fencers work in the boy. Parry with monosyllables, keep the distance polite. Gendry looked down and then up with decision, as if deciding to be honest would save time. He came sometimes, he said. He was a big man. He had black hair. He gave my mother a golden coin once. She said it was a stag, and so it was fitting. His mouth thinned. I remember he laughed. You have a good arm, Ned said. Keep it that way. Do not let men fit you for glory. Let your work fit you for bread. Gendry blinked as if the advice were a blow he had not expected. He said. On the way back, Littlefinger found them in the turning of a lane, as if he had been lying in wait in the angle where the wall met the sunlight. He smiled at Jon because the boy had begun to see where smiles were dangerous. My lord, he purred, that voice like a velvet bag with something hard inside. If you have a taste for fragments of the late hand's curiosity, I have a morsel or two to whet it. Do you? Ned said. He did not slow. A child, Peter said, in a house where wine is poured and the sheets smell like limed linen. Not your child, I assure you. The king's. He let the word linger like fat on a lip. A girl with hair like licorice and eyes like a summer sky. What a charming combination. It would ease my nerves, Lord, to think that the hand knew about his king's charity. You could simply say you wish to lead me to a brothel and save yourself the labor of metaphor, Ned said, and because he was from the north, the words were not a sharpness but a kind of weary housekeeping. Jory nodded. They were going. Jon set his face toward the street of silk and kept his steps steady. Ghost's ears turned once to catch a scurry in a gutter and then resumed their listening. The woman who ran the place turned out to be the sort of person the city grows for its own purposes. Handsome, practical, unafraid of lords because their coin needs the same folding as any other. She carried the baby herself, as if daring anyone to call her work unholy while she did a holy thing. The child stared at Ned with that absolute interest babies have when their brains are writing maps no one will ever see. Her hair was dark as sweet tar. Her little fingers clenched air as if it were a ribbon. Her mother touched her cheek and made a small coo that did not belong to any saleable skill. Her father is generous, the woman said, each syllable selected from a shelf of careful possibilities. He visits when he can. He's kind to her. However else he is to the world, he is kind to her. Ned looked at the baby as if he could read a book in her face and find only a single letter repeated over and over. He did not touch her. Jon saw his father wish that kindness were enough to balance cruelty, and then put the wish down in the place where a man stores the desires that would make him less useful if he let them live. On the way out, Jory fell half a pace behind to speak with a girl whose laugh had no stake in guilt. Peter dusted a length of imaginary lint off his cuff. Sweet, are they not? He said. Bastards. They do not complicate succession so much as they complicate consciences. Fortunately, we are a modern city and consciences are out of fashion. Were yours ever in? Ned asked. I am a collector, Littlefinger said lightly. They are hard to display. They did not know, in those steps on that sunbright street, that they had timed their exit exactly to meet the next turn of the wheel. Jaime Lannister waited in the street with a handful of men chosen for the look of them as much as their hands. His hair made its own weather. His smile, which had seemed a habit, became a blade, and he used it to cut polite preambles away. My brother, he said. He dines at the crossroads tonight in a room with very poor walls. A woman you trust has laid hands on him, who has no right. He drew his sword as if it belonged to him in a way that made other men's swords seem on loan. I am here to ask the hand for the civility of returning the queen's brother to the queen. I am not a turnkey, Ned said. The tired in his voice was not a weakness. It was a man putting his feet where he had to put them and not where the stones would be kind. Your brother is accused. He will have a chance to answer. By a woman who thinks a dagger's kind of jewelry is a family keepsake, Jaime said. He stepped closer, as one does in dance. Ah, but we will not borrow truth from the future, will we? We will take it now in the form we like. His sword lifted a fraction. The boy who killed my prince's image has chosen the wrong day to walk in this street. Not a boy, Jon said, and immediately regretted flicking the fly. Jaime's eyes found him, and in them something like pleasure appeared, the way a cat's eye brightens at a mouse that turns to strike. Men moved at once. There was space enough for a fight, but not enough for a polite one. The first man at Jory had a dagger in his left hand for reluctance. That saved Jory's life for a heartbeat and cost it the next. The blade went into Jory's neck, a magician's trick made ordinary by practice, and blood came the only way it can. Jon's body did not think. His sword was out, and he was already stepping to put the length of himself where his father's chest would be. He heard a hoarse whinny, a barrel burst, the city laugh at itself somewhere, none of it relevant. Jaime came as most men think they can, and almost none can. He floated across ground that broke other men's promises. Jon had time to think ruefully, so the songs were not all lies. The first pass he barely parried. His wrists felt the advice Barristan Selmy had given him and applied it like a tourniquet. He stepped back to make space and found a wall with the back of his boot nearly an instant before his spine would have. Ghost accelerated from the doorway like a thrown spear, but Sandor Clegane was there with a gauntlet fist and a curse, and a boot taught the wolf that men are treacherous when you interrupt them at their work. Ned's sword spoke with Jaime's. That was not pretty. It was that old sad truth pressed into iron. Intent meets intent, and neither can be forgiven. The men around them clashed and cursed and died or did not. Jon saw one of the Lannister jailers' faces go slack as a northern guard's knife found the ribs. He saw the way the street of silk's dust leapt at each footstep, the way even the air seemed to want to get out of the way. Jory fell on his side, and the sight of it put something cold near Jon's heart he would take out and look at for years. He did not have the time to be tender with it now. He realized he was not Jaime's opponent. He was Jaime's lesson. That gave him a strange sort of relief. He would lose with honor, and it would be instructive. He would keep losing until a gap opened between one heartbeat and the next where a man like Jaime made his home, and then he would bleed in such a way that later he could say, "I kept the space." Jaime fainted, lazily, and Jon did not flinch. He set his feet and saw what the Kingslayer liked. He liked men who ran too fast and made their own throats available. Jon did not run. He moved his blade to exhaust some of that laughter. It worked a little. Jaime's grin flickered toward respect. Then a horse spooked. The cart at the end of the lane lurched. A wheelbit stone and slid. A man flew. The chaos reached out a lazy hand and tipped them. Ned stumbled the smallest amount, the kind only sons and swords notice. Jaime's point came on like a summer storm. Jon moved to take it in the meat of his shoulder where it would bind his arm but not his life, and someone else arrived. A man on a horse with better timing than character. He put the animal between Jon and Jaime. The hoof struck Jon's knee, and the world turned wet and spangled for a breath. Pain is a public language. It shouted. Jon went down. The wind went out of him like a prayer. When the street had finished deciding, Jory was dead with the look of a man surprised to find himself so. A Winterfell guard was dead beside him. 2 Lannister men lay gray. Ned sat in the dust with a leg that had learned a new set of angles. Jaime stood, breathing like a man who had remembered he has lungs and that they behave the same in victory and in defeat. He pushed sweat back from his face with the back of his wrist and looked at Jon where he had fallen. At the white wolf with his lips peeled back and his whole body shaking with the effort of being held. "You learn," Jaime said. "Good. Learn to run when men like me wish to teach you. There's a truth in cowardice, boy. It's called living." He nodded, almost courteous, toward Ned. "My lady sends her regards." Tell her to keep her hands off my brother, or we will untidy this city harder." He left with his men, and the lane filled up at once with the people who take joy in inventory. Dead men in their proper numbers, blood evenly distributed among the paving stones, the hand carried on a litter the way lords are always carried when they cannot walk themselves. Robert raged and then laughed and then wished for wine. Cersei let her mouth speak and let men think that was the only way it could hurt them. Sansa cried silently with her face set in that pretty, ladle-like way that makes a girl's tears pass without comment. Arya went and practiced until her feet bled through their thin shoes, and when Syrio told her to stop, she bared her teeth and pretended to be a boy so he could stop seeing something in her he did not like. Ned lay with his leg immobile, learning the way rooms shrink when a man cannot leave. The tourney announced itself as if to mock him, drums and banners and men walking around in plates of polished pride. Jon watched from the railing with the other Winterfell men because if joy must be served, then some of his people would eat it. Sansa went and sat with the queen and let the pageantry pour into her like a sweet wine. She drank and drank. Arya refused to go. She threw a pear core at a goose and then apologized to the goose for missing. The lists were set in the shadow of the city's desire to be greater than itself. The first day was a rain of lances. The second day was bloodier. Ser Hugh of the Vale went down with a fountain from his neck to remind men that a tournament may be pretend, but steel never agrees to theater. The mountain's horse died, and Gregor Clegane's rage came up from the place where he had spent 30 years keeping it. He took his greatsword to the beast, and even men who had seen slaughter took a step back, because there is a kind of killing that unmans the killer and everyone near. The hound stepped before him, not to save a boy's life, but to test whether the line he had drawn in his childhood could be redrawn with his adult hands. They circled old Simon's lute forgotten midstrum, children's mouths apple round. The mountain's sword moved like a mill wheel, the hound's like an answer that refuses to be penned. When Robert shouted and horns blew, it was not mercy so much as the good sense to realize the thing could not be contained by the pretext that birthed it. Sansa saw only the romance of the hound kneeling to the crown. Jon saw the cost, how the hound turned his face away from fire as if from a hand raised to strike. After, when men had eaten enough meat to think themselves stories again, Littlefinger came like appetite after a feast, still hungry. He drew Ned, limping, to a garden where fountains acted like courtiers, and told him in a soft, careful voice that a certain man who had been the king's hand before had come often to a certain papermaker, that he had also gone to see a smith whose name was Moat, that he had left coins in the cradle of a child who did not know her father's name. Ned nodded as if he were already tired of the scholarship of sin. Peter smiled. "Your honor is a god," he said sweetly. "It will not save you. Gods rarely do." Ned's face did not change. "You will find that men who kneel to gods do not like it when you say so," he said. "It makes prayer sound foolish, and prayer is sometimes the only work we can do when the city is asleep." Peter laughed and made a bow that could be read 3 ways, like a sentence with a missing comma. Word came by way of the river gate and a courier whose horse's coat had knit itself with salt. Lady Catelyn Stark had declared a guest right at the inn at the crossroads and then, having been shown the dagger that had lain near her unconscious boy, called on men loyal to Riverrun to rise and assist her in arresting the queen's brother. Tyrion Lannister had been taken by the Tully banner and was on the high road with a hillman's stairs following him in packs. The city reacted the way any creature does when a pain in a tooth finally becomes unbearable. It thrashed. Jaime's white cloak flicked through streets like an elegant knife. Lannister gold poured like new honey over old resentments. Jon watched numbers of men who had once worn a city watchman's grim bore. Dom now wear a new color underneath for the promise of an extra coin. Ned could not move quickly. He moved cleverly instead. He placed men in places where their usefulness would be a surprise when it occurred. He asked Jon to sleep on the pallet nearest Sansa's door and to let Ghost choose where to put his head while Arya slept. "If a door opens at night," Ned said, "I want teeth to meet it." Jon did not ask whose teeth were meant. Ghost made the decision a courtesy. Arya chased cats because Syrio told her to. He explained, with that warm patience that had its own edges, that learning to catch what does not wish to be caught is better practice than felling a great tree with a poor axe. She moved through the red keep like water sent through cracks. The cats learned her and then hated her less. Once she came back with a scratch high on her cheekbone that looked like punctuation. "The black one," she said, breathless. "Is a demon." "Not a demon," Syrio said. "A cat." He made a shift with his wrists that meant, and those are much harder than demons. On a day when the city's heat sat in windows like beggars, Arya followed the black cat farther than she meant to. Down a stair where the air had a thickness old fires give, into a place where the stones remembered dragons having slept, into a breath below breath where voices came and went with no bodies attached. She crouched, small and intent, and heard two men letting their words travel as if they, too, had once been forced through narrow channels and so had learned to be thin. One voice had butter and puppets in it. The other had spices and a meal for a friend a long way off. "And the wolf and the lion will tear each other's throats soon enough," said one, and Arya's skin turned to so many listening ears she felt flayed. "We will let them. The child is with child now, and the savages will not be moved to wait." "Your friend loves his games," said the other. "We play ours nearer to the fire. We will need a bird to carry a word to." She did not understand all of it. She understood enough to make the hair on her arms stand. She backed away and ran. She found Jon in the yard where he had been working a series of cuts against the post until his breathing found a small rhythm that the city could not disrupt. She told him what she had heard in bursts, like a bird delivering river water in its beak. He did not laugh. He did not say, "A child's fancy." He put his hand on Ghost's head and said, "Show me." She took him as far as she dared. He felt the breath of the underways, felt heat that did not belong to the day, heard only the echo of their own careful steps. He did not push into the nest. He had learned enough from wolves to know that if you put your hand in another creature's hole, you ought to be more certain of your teeth than of your fingers. He brought Arya back up into the red light of evening and washed her scratch with vinegar while she hissed at him as if she were the cat. Then he went to Ned with it. Ned looked at his daughter and saw her shaking with the indignation that belongs to the truthful when men doubt. He looked at his boy and saw no doubt. He closed his eyes and then opened them. "The city is a person," he said. "It has a mouth. It must eat. We are trying to decide whether we can teach it not to eat us first." Robert called a council to decide if men in a far city should die because he feared a child yet unborn. The talk was a net thrown over the room. Men got caught in it in different places and pretended they had volunteered. Varys spoke of tidings from the east with a delicate sorrow, like a man apologizing for the weather. Littlefinger did calculations and made murder seem like a reasonable line item. Renly frowned as if he had smelled something that claimed to be fish but was not. Pycelle cleared his throat socially before confessing that old kings, better kings, might have done the thing before this to save their lands from dragonfire. Ned said no. He said it the first time they asked and the last. He said it knowing the word would cost him, that the city would take the syllable and make it into a knife to cut him with later. He pushed away from the table and resigned and did not do it melodramatically, which is the only kind of resignation that wounds a king's vanity. Robert ranted, the rant of a man who knows he is wrong but wants someone else to tell him it is right. Then he laughed again and cajoled and told Ned to take a night's sleep and see if justice looked different in the morning. Sansa begged to go to the royal dinner. Her eyes were too large and too bright and full of the idea that summer might become permanent if she simply wished hard enough. Ned let her. It was an education of the city's cruelties a father would choose not to give if he wished to keep the girl. But fathers do not keep girls. The city does. The queen smiled and placed Sansa in the garden where the smiles are the exact size of the knives. Joffrey's mouth returned to health faster than his pride did. He selected remarks like a child selecting stones to throw at a bird. Sansa did not learn to duck. She learned to harden. It is a different skill and a worse one. The day after the council, Ned went into the Godswood of the Red Keep and took the one place in the city that had leaves for walls and wind for gossip. He sent men away and asked Jon to remain and then told him to wait, close enough to see if a blade flashed, far enough not to hear if the talk itself needed to be left behind when the parties went. Cersei came late because she was a queen and lateness is as much a portion as fruit. Her hair carried the sun with it. Her eyes were green in the way snakes are described by men who have seen only grass in stories. She stood where the weirwood's carved face could see her pretenses and not be impressed. They spoke. Jon stole glances and then stole none, because to steal glances at a conversation like that is to mislearn what you cannot afford to mislearn. He watched instead the pattern of leaves moving, the way the water in the little pool made a nervous air. When Cersei left, she did not look at him, which was both a kindness and a warning. "What did you tell her?" Jon asked when the Queen's steps had thinned. "The truth," Ned said. He looked very tired. "Enough of it to let her make her choices. She will pick war over shame. She has always picked war over shame." "You believe we will have both," Jon said. "Yes," Ned answered, "but perhaps not today." He put a hand on Jon's shoulder and squeezed it once, hard. He was making himself memorize the shape of the boy. He had begun doing that without admitting it to himself. From the north, ravens came and told their own stories. Robb wrote in the sturdy hand of a boy learning to put on a man's boots. Bran had spoken again and then slept. Sometimes he woke long enough to look at the window as if measuring it. He said he dreamed of wolves and of the taste of the wind. He said he could feel when his mother came into the room whether he was awake or not. Catelyn wrote fewer words and of different weight. The riverlands began to move through her, and she threw them like weather. From the eyrie, Pepper announced itself with a bird. Lisa Arryn had taken Tyrion to the Moon Door's memory and meant to nudge him toward a story the Vale could tell itself about justice. Men who know the High Road's habits did not like the sound of that at all. Jaime's men bristled. Lannisters took offense as a dog takes scent. Meaningfully and with such confidence you could doubt it and be called mad. The small folk felt it in their pockets and in the cost of bread. The king went hunting because when the world refuses to do as a man expects, he either hunts or he prays. He did not pray. His armor was hung up and no one took it down. He carried a spear and his thirst and laughed at things that were not jokes. Renly went and came back angry, which was interesting. The Lannisters were seen in all the places they could carve tunnels. The city said, in its way, that something was coming. Doors stuck in their jambs and men shouted at pigs as if pigs understood politics. Ned, his leg less a wolf's bite and more a dog's worry by then, sent Jon with Jax and Hullen to the armorer again with a message for Gendry that was not written. "Do not go out at night. Do not drink anyone else's beer. If a man shows you a coin and asks for your loyalty, put the coin in your pocket and run." Jon delivered it in the plain way he did such things, and the black-haired boy looked at him with blue eyes that had not yet learned city angles and said, "Why?" Jon could not say because the king sows his seed like a farmer drunk, and your face is a field. He said instead, "Because there are men who think you are worth more dead than working." Gendry nodded as if he were a hammer. He was good at being a hammer. He put his head down and struck and did not look up even when the city screamed that the king had been carried into his own house like a sack of grain that had split. Robert came back hurt. "Boar." "What?" "A spear whose point had the twin of the boar's intelligence." The story was told with different flavors depending on the tongue. Jon heard 3 versions in as many hours. He worried less about accuracy than about the that of it. The king lay in a bed that had not been made to receive such men. He groaned and then laughed and then called for Ned. Cersei brushed her thumb over an ivy pattern on a pitcher. Joffrey tried to look solemn and summoned petulance instead. Ned went to the king with the gait of a man who knows that past the next door is the end of a road he can see as clearly as if it were written. He took Jon with him to the threshold and then let him stand just inside to hear what fear would not let him mishear. Robert smelled of rot and grapes. He gripped Ned's hand and said he had hoped for a road that did not end here, and now he did not care where it went because he was so tired. He told Ned to write a thing that would make the world right after he died. He said the word son, because men dying should be allowed their illusions. He did not say which one. He said, "My son," over and over, as if possession might outlast breath. Ned wrote and did not write. His hand, which had never lied, wrote the heir, because writing another boy's name in the space marked by a king's wish would be part of what would set all the horses bolting. He sealed the paper with wax that held the North in the moment before it changes. Robert slept. Cersei watched him sleep with a face that did not tell her plans as clearly as she had learned to tell lesser men their fates. She saw the paper. She did not ask to see it. She went away and gathered her hunters. Jon walked beside his father back to their rooms and listened to the sound of the city outside make the noises cities make when they smell blood. "I will send letters," Ned said. "I will send for men who remember I am not an idea but a man with a blade and a way of deciding where to put it. We will weather the day." "Will we?" Jon asked, because sometimes a son is permitted to be a brother. "For a little," Ned said. He did not stop walking. "For a little." The little came and turned into less. Cersei moved with the clear calm of a woman who had told herself 3 stories and chosen the best. Littlefinger sidled up with an offer to call the City Watch's coin after his voice. Varys brought warnings that felt like omens in long robes. Pycelle obfuscated. Renly counseled speed. Stannis had gone like a kettle thrown off the fire at the first bubble, to brood in a place where the sea could teach him patience and not humility. Ned spoke to Jon in the peace of a morning that does not belong to either the night or the day. "If this goes badly," he said, and did not specify which this because there is always one, "you will go to the ships. You will take your sisters if you can, and if you cannot you will take the road you must. There are doors. Jory knew them. I will tell you 2 Jory never needed to use. The Godswood's route is one. The dry well near the armory is another. If a man in a gold cloak offers to help you, thank him and ask him for salt. If he does not have salt, he does not work for me." "You think Peter lies," Jon said. "I think Peter tells the truth when it is useful to him to tell the truth, which is worse," Ned said. "A man who lies can be caught with his hands on the thing. A man who tells the truth will ask you to take his hand, and then you will notice you are in a river and he is on the bank." He took Jon's face in both hands and held it in place the way men hold a thought they cannot afford to forget. "If I ask you in a few hours to be a coward, you will do it as bravely as you can." "I will," Jon said. They walked into the throne room as men walk into a place where words will change their clothes and come away with blood on them. The Iron Throne was uglier than any story had prepared Jon to see. It was the sort of ugliness that seems to feed on the attention paid to it. Joffrey sat with his chin lifted by the invisible hands of vanity. Cersei stood like a woman who has already arranged the future at breakfast. The gold cloaks stood as if they were statues. The lords of less consequence arranged themselves to be best seen when the story was told later. Ned held the paper which had Robert's weight and his own honor battling under wax. He read. He spoke. He made the proposal that would have allowed a boy to live and grow into a king unmade by the knowledge of what had made him. Cersei smiled the sort of smile a woman wears when she finds the knife she buried where she left it and sees that it has not rusted. "Tear it," she said to her son without taking her eyes off Ned.
Joffrey Tore.
Gold cloaks shifted like a field of grain under a new wind. Littlefinger had his hands behind his back. The city opened its mouth. It did not swallow Jon that day. He could not tell afterward if that was wisdom or luck. Men moved. Swords came half out and then out altogether. Ned said a thing which, if it had been done at once, would have made the next hours different. They were not done at once. The first blood was drawn. The second way was chosen. The gold cloaks had understood their orders. They struck where the Stark's men had shown their backs to trust. Men jacked and Hullen and 2 more went down in the time it takes to say a prayer and then take it back. Jon saw Littlefinger's hand move. He did not see Littlefinger's knife because it was already where it had meant to be, holding Ned where honor can be held. "I warned you not to trust me," Peter whispered, and the words were the plumpest fruit he had ever plucked from his own tree. Ghost went for the knee of a gold cloak who had raised his sword too high. The dire wolf brought him down and then was on his feet again, dancing in blood and howl. Jon did what he had been told he would one day have to do. He looked for the moment when bravery was a vanity and cowardice a duty. He put his hand on his father's arm. Ned turned his face a little, and in the small space language they had made in the last months, Jon read, "Go." He went. He did not run as men run when they lose a wager. He ran like water runs when a dam breaks. He did not look back because there is a kind of superstition that is not superstition at all. You do not look back when a father has given you a task that requires you to look only forward. Ghost ran with him, white as gone snow, not making a noise any other creature could use. The first door was blocked by men in gold who had sat the night playing at dice. The second door was clear because men do not lay guard on things only Stark men know. Jon slid into a space that had the weight of a secret and felt the keep's bones around him. He came out 2 halls over and made for Arya by instinct. A hallway's turn showed him a boy down on his belly, striped with blood and ash from a kitchen fire gone wrong. The boy's fingers were black with flour and fear. "Run," Jon hissed. "Now." The boy ran. Arya was not in her bed. She was where she always was when men needed to find her, where no man would think to look. She had taken to sleeping sometimes on the roof near a vent where the kitchen's warmth breathed up. Jon saw the curl of her dark hair and reached through the grate. She woke like a cat, hissing, then saw his eyes and did not speak. He lifted her with a strength that surprised them both. The grate went back without sound. Ghost stood with his ears on the city, making jeweled decisions with them. "Sansa," Arya whispered when her feet touched the floor. "I will try," Jon said, choosing the cruel order, the least sure last. "Come." They took the way Syrio had shown her, and then a way that Syrio did not know because wolves' noses draw maps martial men forget. The dry well near the armory had stones that shook under their feet. Arya went over them without hate for the stones because her hatred needed to be saved. The door beyond kicked once and then yielded, dry and squealing, and then they were in the cool again where time runs differently. When you are in the walls, time is something you owe to dogs and to the breath in your throat, not to lords. Jon found the place where he could look through a violet in a garden without being seen, and he saw the queen leading Sansa across white stones at a measured pace. Sansa's face had been washed clean and pinned. It shone the way ivory does before use. Beside her the hound walked with no expression. He was a knife men never put away. Joffrey tasted each corner of his mouth as if words lived there. The queen's hand rested on Sansa's shoulder almost lovingly. "I can take her," Arya breathed, and in the same breath, "No, I cannot." She bit the edge of her hand and made no sound. Jon watched Sansa blink once. Slowly, in a way that said she had seen a bird fly, had made a wish, and had put the wish away in a clean place. The wolf in him howled. The man did not. The man held an 8-year-old's wrist and pressed. It is a kind of murder the restraint men must practice on themselves when they are young. He took Arya to the door that men had carved for the fire's escape before dragons taught them better. He showed her the seam, the bar, the wedge. He put her hand on the iron so she would remember it. "If you get separated," he said, the words making of themselves a debt, "go here. There are steps that lead down and out. The river will be there. There is a ship that takes grain. The man who runs it has a sister in White Harbor. Tell him Winterfell's daughter asks, and he will not turn you away. He is from the north. He keeps salt in his pocket without thinking about it." "Why do men keep salt?" Arya asked, small and furious. "Because they are afraid of forgetting how to feed themselves when they have become used to being fed," Jon answered, not certain the answer made sense. "I will find you. If I do not, you will find me later." She nodded like a boy and like a Stark. He embraced her once in the way he had always wanted to and had withheld because the world tells bastards to keep their hands to themselves. He let her go. Ghost put his nose to her hand and touched it, and she looked as if that made her taller. She ran. She did not look back, as her brother had not. Sansa was not a creature one could rescue as one rescues a rabbit from a snare. She was being made into a banner. Jon could not rip the cloth without pulling down the pole and the men who held it. He could not do that in an afternoon. He could not do it alone or with one wolf. He watched where the queen put her, how many women the queen had decided would keep her company, which is a phrase that means wrap her in threats until she mistakes them for comfort. He watched where the hound stood when the women left and how his eyes went to the window once, then to the door. He filed it. He did not love the next choice. He made it anyway. He went back to Ned in a way that let him be caught if being caught was the price to learn what could still be saved by being a man instead of a wolf. The gold cloaks were about their reproductive work, swelling and splitting along the corridors, seeding rage and fear, and the dust men will call justice a week from now because crimes demand names. They took Jon at the second stair. Ghost snarled and showed them precisely that they were not the most dangerous thing in this hall. Jon said the word softly that meant stop, which had cost him 1,000 small devotions to teach, and he was never sorrier to use it. The gold cloaks wrapped them in their brown. They took the sword that had spent its years learning his hands and the way those hands sweat when fear is useful. They brought him to a room where Littlefinger's smile already was, and to a door with no guards because a man inside did not need them. Ned lay on a couch with his leg captured by wood and cloth. He had his hands and his mouth. For now they had left him those. Jon was thrust down to his knees because ritual makes such gestures important to men who doubt their stories will sound true later without them. He knelt. He did not bend his neck. Ghost stood with his sides working and his eyes black. The queen sat because this was her court and because sitting had always been her strength. Joffrey stood because sitting would have made him look small. Littlefinger leaned because leaning makes a liar look like a man at a window. "You should have taken the bargain, Lord Stark," the queen said. "The kindly one. Send your girls away, kneel, let the city call you blind and brave and fools at once. You could have had a quiet end. Quiet lives are for honest places," Ned said. "This is not one." He turned his head toward Jon and added, "Because fathers are allowed final things. You did well." He did not say at what, because for once he trusted the boy to know. "Your bastard is very clean," the queen remarked. "Do you oil him in the morning so he will slide off your honor when the day is done?" Her eyes flickered to Ghost and back. "Put the animal outside before it forgets itself and makes this uglier than it should be." The hound, without comment, took Ghost by the scruff and moved him with a force that would have gotten another man killed. The wolf did not go for the throat. He looked at Jon for permission and received it. He let himself be taken into the hall and then turned and lay down across the threshold as if he could be a door after all. "I will speak what I have," Ned said, "and then you will have it to decide with." He began to tell them of lineages and hair and of the way seed insists on itself, of a boy in a forge and a baby in a whore's arms, of a last hand and his questions, of a fall from a tower and a child's demented whisper. The queen listened as one listens to a man recite a poem he thinks will save him. Joffrey got bored and then remembered he must look vengeful. He practiced the expression until it began to look like a grimace. When the words were done with them, there was the work left. The queen stood and walked to the window as if she had tired of using her face for action. "I remember you as a boy," she said to Ned, and the memory was either true or it was not. It served. "You were a little colder then. You did not look like someone who would audition honesty here in this heat." She turned, delicate as a sword drawn under the table. "The law is a tool. I will use it now." Ned was sent where men are sent when the city wishes to think while keeping its prey in a cage it can admire. Sansa was kept in rooms meant for comfort until comfort became another word for chain. Arya was not found, which disappointed the queen and sweetened Varys's mourning. Jon was taken to steel and stone and left holding nothing except the knowledge of doors that lead outward and of wolves that cannot be leashed by men who do not know their names. He did not sleep. When the guard nodded, he moved. He used the smallest space to carry a word into the next, to a boy at a kitchen fire, to a man who had cooked for Ned and had hated all lords equally and thus was perhaps the most reliable, to a woman whose cousin had married a fisherman at White Harbor who told good stories and kept his promises and his ropes in equal order. He fed the rumor that needed to be fed, that a child on a grain ship would be carrying a bundle that should not be counted or opened and should be seen to carry weight heavier than it looked. He put coins where coins carry obedience. He put salt into hands because he had learned that men who taste salt before doing a dangerous thing are more likely to do it with care. He let Ghost off the leash he had never worn. The wolf moved like an answer that had been deferred. He went to the places where girls with hair the color of storm sleep. He prowled under tapestries with dire wolves on them and put his scent along the hem. He learned the guards' silly tricks. He lay again at the door where Sansa had stood laughing in better days and watched the woman who waited outside wear her patience down like a prayer bead. He went, later, to the ship that smelled like wheat and river, touched the plank with his nose, touched the hem of a sailor-woman's skirt, and came back to lie under the window where his boy leaned down to put a hand to him in the dark, the way men touch their own faces to be certain they still exist. In the days that followed, the city lived too quickly. A raven went to the Eyrie, another to the Rock, another to Dragonstone as a matter of form. The Rock's raven returned with silk words tied to its leg and a gold coin tied as a joke. The Eyrie's bird came back with nothing but the relief in the air that sometimes follows when a message is sent and a man has exhausted his appetite for choice. Dragonstone's raven returned to its tower and shat on a parapet, which was as much as the island was willing to do for the city at the moment. Men in gold cloaks walked with one another because their captain did not trust them alone. When they saw Jon, half of them sneered because they were men and felt bigger for it, and half looked away because he had a wolf and did not appear to mind if a man thought him a beast. The small folk had begun to peg their notices on the Red Keep's outer wall. Men asked for the city to give back their sons and their boots. Women with children alive wrapped in cloth asked for bread without weevils. Children asked that dogs be allowed to live. The city did not answer. It was busy with kings. One evening, when the sky had put on the color sailors like, because it means they will not drown today as surely as yesterday promised, Jon went to the low door by the kitchens where the old cook spat his pipe and said, "7 hells." The man looked up at him, squinted and said, "Aye," because Starks say, "Aye," when they have decided to do something that might cost them. Jon gave him a pouch with 9 coins in it. 2 from the north, silver and with a direwolf's head worn nearly smooth, and 7 from the city, each with a stag that looked thinner than the last. "If a girl with dark hair asks for your back door," Jon said, "you will say you are full of pigs. She will know what that means, and you will be full of pigs, because you will take a sack there and chew the meat alone to see if it has spoiled." The cook nodded as if he had been given the opportunity to be part of a story yanked too hard to be graceful. "Aye," he said again. Jon saw Syrio once more in a corridor that did not see a lot of dance. The Braavosi man had a sword that was no sword, a stick that had learned to deny swords their joy. He looked at Jon and with a nod set down a debt that had not been acknowledged and thus felt important. "A girl learns," he said without flourish. "She is quicker tomorrow." "I know," Jon said. "I am sending her where she can be quick for years." "She will hate you for it," Syrio said, and the kindness in the forecast was intense. "I expect so," Jon said. "Hate is one way of remembering." They left it there. The corridor let them pass in both directions and did not grab their ankles. Night came with too many thoughts and not enough air. On the water, a long barge went without torches. The oars dipped like old men bowing low to the sea they feared. Up in the rock where men make the floor out of gold by grinding it down to a snuff and throwing it everywhere to walk on, a woman wore her hair long and told herself stories about lions and meat and weather. In the Vale, a boy was coaxed toward sleep by the sound of a mother's voice that had forgotten how to be useful and so made itself loud. In Winterfell, a boy turned onto his side and reached with his mind for a wolf's thick fur and found it. He took the vision into his mouth like a sweet and sucked it. Jon did not sleep. He listened to the city's breath and guessed its dreams and waited. The door by the well made its tiny complaint under the hand of a child who had learned to weigh her steps. He went there and did not go there. He waited at the kitchen door, which opened when it was meant to. A girl with a knight in her hair stood with her chin lifted and tear tracks dried on her face, so the salt made maps of places she would one day walk. She did not tremble. She had spent trembling on better things. He did not hug her this time. He did not have enough to give to both arms. He gave her a satchel as light as truth and heavy as a father's absence. He gave her a loaf and then touched the blade she had stolen from a boy's hand and hidden in straw like the cleverest of girls. Do not show it. Do not use it until using it is the only way to be a bird rather than a nail. She nodded. He touched her hair because there is no law against that. Ghost put his nose under her hand and lifted. Once. The old cook coughed once, theatrically, and the kitchen smelled of cinnamon because someone had burned cinnamon to make it clear that where smoke goes, it leaves blessings or at least pleasant lies. Arya slipped through the slit of night the way a child slips through men in a market. She did not look back. Jon wanted, so much that it made his teeth ache, to follow her and shut every door behind them and walk until they found a wood with no men in it, and a stream with no blood in it, and a house that knew the word father without having to teach it new habits. Instead, he went up the stairs because lords were killed up there, and a bastard who had elected to be a man had to see it done if seeing could alter the angle of a blade by even a thumb's worth. Sansa he could not move like a cat. She was a silken thing being knitted into a rope. He chose the slow way, and it made him furious, and he did it anyway. Words fed to one woman who had always wanted to see the north. A favor traded to a guardsman who liked his job less than his daughter. A letter tucked into the seam of a maid's skirt because the maid would go to White Harbor in a month and letters lie quiet when they are told to. He made the motion that moves a heavy object on a cart by the patient application of shoulder and grunts. He waited. He went once more to the Godswood where the trees had not yet learned the name of the boy from the far north. He stood with his hand against the weirwood's smooth-cut face and said nothing. The leaves moved in the night's breath. He was not certain whether he asked anything from the gods. He was more certain that if they answered, they would do it in the way of this city, with a door opening somewhere he had never thought to look. When he returned to the rooms where he had learned the habits of the Hand's household, he found one more message he had not asked for and could not throw away. A bit of parchment with ink still thinking about drying. It was not from the rock. It was not from the Eyrie. It was not a small council's thing. It said only, "The boy is bright. The smith slows him because that is the way. The city will take him if you do not. The wolf in you knows it. If you wish to set your own teeth to this meat, come to the place where copper is worked into roses." There are only two places in King's Landing where copper is worked into roses. One belongs to a man who wears cologne and calls himself an artisan. The other belongs to a woman with a back that has borne 3 daughters and a husband who has not been sober for more than 5 hours in as many years. Jon went to the latter because work is done there, and men who do work tell the truth when they are caught between what they cannot have and what they cannot lose. The woman had a scar along her jaw that might have been a man's hand remembered in the only legal way left to her. She looked at the boy and then at Jon and then at the wolf, who had curled himself politely beneath the table like a sin at a feast. She nodded. She knew who sent the message. She knew what it meant. "He can sleep in the back," she said without preamble, "until you make your place safe. Then he can go back to his hammer." Jon did not ask why she would risk it. He put coin on the table. She glanced at it as one glances at a man who brings a bowl of clean water to a thirsty dog and expects applause. "He will sweep," she said. "He will sweep," Jon agreed. He did not know if he was saving the boy or using him to save himself from the fear that he had let too much go without grabbing at it. He did not care which it was. He put his hand on Ghost's head and thought of a ship sliding out of the Blackwater without a light and of a city filled with men who felt clever and would learn in their time what the clever always do. That the harvest of cleverness is never what it promised to be. At dawn, while the gulls were making their battered arguments and the Red Keep was pretending to sleep, Varys came to Jon as if the corridor had decided to grow a spider and dress it in perfume. He smiled as if the boy were his nephew and he had always wished to bring him sweets. "You do good work," he said. "For a wolf. You do any work?" Jon asked because fatigue eats gentleness and then begins on tact. "I do only the work that matters," Varys replied, delighted. "The work that leaves no print and saves no men anyone will sing of." He peered at Jon with a crook of the head. "Do not try to save everyone," he advised when Jon did not ask. "Only be careful of whom you do save. Saving the wrong ones makes the gods notice you, and when the gods notice you, they are usually feeling cruel." He drifted away with a rustle of cunning. Jon hated him and valued him both and could not make his hands sit still after he had gone. The ship that carried a child in the space no one counted slipped past the rocks into a morning that was unusually obedient. The woman at the tiller spat and rubbed a charm between her fingers that had been given to her by a brother who had died falling off a horse he had owned since childhood and thought an extension of his body. She looked back once at the city and the line of its red against a sky that would not be the same tomorrow as today. She thought of salt pork and of the possibility of a hawk. She did not think of kings. In the Tower of the Hand, which had ceased to belong to the man it was built for and had not yet learned to belong to anyone else, Jon lay down on his pallet next to the door he had kept so faithfully that the grain had begun to remember the shape of his shoulder. Ghosts stretched along him like a white river. He did not sleep. He closed his eyes and counted the breaths of a creature which has never worried about titles and plans. He tried to match it and failed. He tried again. The attempt was a kind of prayer. He did not know it, but it was heard. Under the castle, in the fat old dark, two men whose voices travel began again to send words on their small private roads. One said, "The wolf is in the garden." The other said, "Good. The lions will be hungry when he is not there." Above them the city held its breath and the morning came, a kind of mercy, and cruel because of it. By midday the heat had set knives where shadows cool buttons so men can press them. A line of women stood under the wall and offered bread that had seen better hours, and a boy who had just learned to whistle taught a younger boy a tune his brother had learned at a wedding 5 years ago that had ended in crying. In the yard, Jon worked the blade because your joints resent it if you are kind. The rhythm steadied him. He watched his shadow work with him, thinner than he, better perhaps. When the messenger came from the sept with the white banner and the word that confessed itself to be a sentence, trial, Jon put down his sword. He wiped his hands. He did not think about what the city would make of Ned in a sept full of men who had begun to think of gods and of their own comfort in the same breath. He thought of Sansa's eyes measuring her gown's ripped seam with calloused fingers earned from embroidery. He thought of a girl on a ship. He thought of a boy with black hair hammering copper and of a woman with a scar breaking bread with him and telling him how to hold it so he would not drop crumbs and feed the rats too. He went to the godswood one more time. He stood where the face in the tree could see him and where he could not see it. The leaves made a sound he could put words to if he wished. He did not. He placed his hand against the bark. His palm and the tree were both warm. He waited until the feeling that he had been placed carefully on a board and asked to stay there subsided enough for the next thing to come in, which was strength enough to walk down into a city that would call him by the wrong name and ask him to answer to it. The doors were open everywhere. It was the city's kindness. It is always kindest when it wants something. He walked in the open and he did not cover his head. Ghost moved with him and did not flick an ear when men shouted. He walked past the place where he had learned to respect Barristan's wrists, past the brothel where a baby had taught him the weight of dark hair, past a window where a woman had once picked a flower from a pot and given it to a child because it was easier than giving her bread. He walked into the sept, which is a place men have learned to look up, and he did not look up. He looked forward. The light came through colored glass and made lies of blood. It laid red on a man's cheek who had never seen the north. It made gold on a boy's hair who was about to call himself king in a voice he had not owned a year ago. It took honest blue and turned it varied. It turned white to wine. Jon thought it an accurate place for a lie if one must have it. He thought, if we go by color, I do not know anyone in this room. They brought Ned in on the wave of murmurs that follows a stone rolled into a pond. He stood straight with a leg that had taught him humility. He looked at the kingling and his mother and did not let the fear of what his death might do to his daughters show in the public places of his face. He spoke when asked. He spoke as a man speaks when he knows the words go into a vacuum and will be carried not by gravity but by men who make a business of carrying. The city sighed, pleased, when the little red mouth on the throne said, "Mercy." The city applauded when the mother leaned and said, "Head." The city is not a merciful thing. It is a crowd, and a crowd is never loving. Jon did not see the sword fall. He saw men move to keep other men from moving. He saw his father put his head where a man puts his head when there is a block to receive it and a prayer to make it into wood eye, instead of stone. He saw a bird fly across the window's blue. He heard his own breath break. Ghost sound was not a sound men make. It was something older. Cut the colored light. For a heartbeat, the sept remembered a kind of god it had not named before. He did not rush. He did not struggle as men who do not know their cause is lost rush and struggle. He stood very still and learned the way a room feels when a father leaves it and a son remains. It is a lesson you cannot learn in any other classroom, and there is no examination, only the memory of a blade and the weight of that memory in your hands every day afterward. The city took its breath and let it out. Joffrey smiled as if a tune had been played well. The queen closed her eyes and opened them because she had too much to do to keep them shut. Sansa became a portrait at once. The hound stared at the floor because there is only one kind of door he can see. Varys looked like a man who had dropped a pin and found it again. Littlefinger pinched his lip because he had been touched by genuine emotion, that of his own success. Jon turned his head just enough to align his eyes with the door and the light beyond. He had prepared 3 courses for the moment when the city did this, and only fools pretend they know which one is correct. He chose the one that would save the most children. He did not know if the gods approved. He did what wolves and men have always done when faced with nets. He looked for the hole and went through it, and did not measure his speed because speed was a vanity and a necessity both. In the days after, the King's Landing made itself a story and told it until it believed it. Jon made other stories. He sent them with men whose faces he did not know to women whose scars he knew better than the lines of his palm. He found the rooms where the quiet women told one another where bread would be and left a folded piece of paper there the size of a bite. He went to the place where the copper was hammered into roses and took the boy and put him with a man who makes bows and does not ask questions and does not drink until the bow is strung. He did not sleep in the same bed 2 nights because men would look for him where he had been honest. He left salt where men could find it and taught 3 boys how to use doors they had not known were useful. He did not leave the city yet. There was the girl in the queen's rooms. There was a ship that could not come back quickly enough. There was a wolf who would not go without him and who would not survive if asked to. There was work, and it was not honorable work, but it was important. He kept his hands clean when he could and dirty when dirt was the only language men would listen to. He learned to barter with fear and not to take more than he could pay back. Some nights he dreamed of the wall. He would wake with his hands ice and his breath fog, and Ghost would lift his head and look at him as if to say, "If you had chosen the white boy, you would be colder and safer both." He did not feel judged. He felt accompanied by what he had not chosen. The world is generous that way. It gives you not only the life you pick, but also the shape of the life that would have been, and asks you to carry both like 2 buckets on a yoke. When the raven came from Winterfell and settled on the sill as if it had come to the right house and only just remembered that its owner had gone, it carried the kind of news ravens prefer, because it makes men fling crumbs with shaking hands. Bran had walked 3 steps. No one had seen him at first. He had been alone, and the room had become briefly the scene of a quiet miracle. He had fallen afterward, and laughed, small and savage. Catelyn had been there to hear it. Robb had written the words and then crossed them out and written them again. The ink smudged where his hand had failed to wait. The letter smelled like the hall's bread and the courtyard's wet stone. Jon read it and shut his eyes and let the city be quiet in his mind. He thought of his small brother, whom he had left to learn to be a new creature, and he thought of the long road between them where men had put notches in the trees when they were boys so they would know later they had been there. He thought, too, of his father in a place where weirwoods do not grow, and of the way the gods must have decided to listen to him anyway, because some men are heard simply because they speak in a certain way. He kept the parchment on him, folded until it was soft as cloth. Some nights he took it out and rubbed the crease as if smoothing it would do something for the boy far away. It would not, he knew that. He did it anyway. Men do such things because the city takes far more away than it gives. And a letter that tells of a child standing is a kind of alchemy that makes even the red keep stone consider mercy for a heartbeat. On a morning when fog had been delayed and arrived late and irritable, the Copper Rose woman gave him back the boy with black hair and told Jon, without turning from her work, that men came and didn't see him because rats are better at standing still than cats. Jon thanked her and left coin and a promise. She told him to keep one and spend the other. He took Gendry to a place where men made arrows and said, "You are not a weapon yet. Be a cord, be a shaft. We will tie you to a string when it is time." The boy had grown in the face in ways the city does against a mother's wishes. He nodded and set his jaw and went to work with a gratefulness he disguised as belligerence. At night, The black cat came and sat on a wall to watch Ghost watch the door. The two creatures were not friends. They shared an understanding that the house had become two houses, one above and one below, and that both required guarding. The cat licked a paw as if to show respect without having to say so. Ghost closed his eyes and listened with his ears. In the sept, men lit candles as if light still had more arguments left to make. On the river, a ship with wheat and a girl on its mind tacked and made her way along the coast toward a port that would not ask questions it could not answer. In the council chamber, chairs were moved without sound. In the queen's rooms, a boy recited the words of kinghood as one recites a catechism and tried them on his tongue. They did not fit yet, but he had time and his mother's patience to teach them to fit. Jon, who had not been given such patience with words, chose his very carefully when he tried them on the ears of men who might just choose to listen to a boy who had a wolf at his heel and a father's face in his mind. "We will go," he told the one man left of Ned's household who had not personally bled to glue the floors and whose knees bent without complaint. "Not today, tomorrow perhaps, or the day after. We will go when the city has been taught where to look and where not. And we will not go alone. We will take the very one they wish most to keep, if we can pry her loose. We will go like water and leave only wet stone to show where we have moved." The man nodded like a pair of bellows and went to make his small preparations. Jon went to the Godswood again because a man is permitted to be a fool once a day when he is doing 3 wise things in a row. He put his hand on the face and did not ask for miracles. He asked for novel things: a door to be open, a stone to be loose when he pushed, a man to be unlucky in his timing. The gods listened to such requests more often than songs. He put his head down that night with his palm still full of bark and his mouth full of the scents of the north. Ghost set his head across his ankles as if to keep him from drifting. In the city, in the low places where barefoot boys learn to run with their knees high so the filth does not slap their shins, rats held court and gnawed at things that had once idealized themselves as bread. In the sky, a moon like a chipped plate made light that made nothing better and nothing worse. In the tower, a woman with red hair, another red, foreign to the city and yet somehow intimate with its intentions, looked out toward the river and smiled as if she found the taste of the air exactly right. The morning would be busy. The next day would be worse. Somewhere beyond even that stood the long winter men joke about and then stop joking when their fingers cannot hold a spoon. But this night, just at the hour that puts the world into a tight fist and then opens it again, the boy from the north slept the sleep of someone who has left 3 doors open and knows which one he will take. He breathed. He did not dream of the wall. He dreamed of the Godswood in Winterfell, and of a stone girl with flowers in her lap turning her head finally, not to listen, but to look and to see him and to nod. The morning broke flat as hammered tin and rang when touched. The Red Keep woke with that particular industry of places that have taught themselves, over years, to do horror neatly. Jon went first to the Copper Roses because work steadies what stories trouble. The woman had her sleeves rolled, copper petals piled in a dull red drift that would turn bright when burnished. Gendry had already gone to the bowyer. She nodded toward the back room mutely to tell him the bed was empty, and then pursed her mouth in what might have been thanks and might have been a bite she saved for later. He left coin, always the right number, never the generous number that offends. On the way back, he passed a market where the city's hunger haggled with itself. A woman cracked an egg against her palm as if divining the day by how the yolk held. A boy blew a tune through a reed he had cut himself, his lip white at the edges with concentration. A singer quickened his strings and started on a ballad Jon had been hearing in snatches for a week, boors and kings and women who loved them too much, which was as wrong as all songs about kings are and just as unforgivable. He slipped through the slant morning shadows and into the keep through a door that had begun to consider itself his. In the great hall they stripped sunlight into slices with high, mean windows. The floor had been swept so often its flagstones were smooth as old breadboards. The boy on the throne played with his sword's pommel, tapping a rhythm on the arm as if the steel were a bell he could ring and men would kneel. His mother stood beside him, green-eyed and implacable, a seam of iron in a dress with sleeves that would have hidden knives if she needed them hidden. She did not. The small council arranged themselves like pieces on a board no one admitted to be playing. Janos Slint wore his chain like a dog with a new collar who has been told it is gold. Ser Marin Trant had a face that looked as if it had forgotten it could smile and was happier for it. Barristan Selmy came forward out of his white. His hair had thinned like a winter's patience. His eyes had not. The boy king lifted his chin and announced, with that careful childish cruelty a court teaches quickly, that the old man's service had been long and was therefore finished. The queen smiled, the smile that says mercy and means ceremony. The hall stirred like grass in a wind that does not touch the ground. Jon did not stand forward. He stood where he could see without being seen, a habit the keep was teaching him because it had so few honest vantage points. He watched Ser Barristan's mouth go hard. Not offended, not injured, but surprised enough to make room for anger, which is rare in men who have taught their hands to be sure even when their hearts are not. The White Knight undid his clasp with steady fingers, and when he stripped the cloak it made a sound like snow slid from a bough. He let it fall. He took off his sword as if removing a weight he had carried out of love and habit, and when he laid it down it made a different sound altogether, the sound of a bell struck once in a church no one entered anymore. Even now, he said, and it was not a threat, which is why every man believed it. I could carve a bloody road through you all and be halfway to the door before any of you remembered to be brave. He did not. He turned and walked away through the hush his life had earned him. No one moved to lay a hand to him. The hound's mouth crooked, a private acknowledgement a wolf gives a boar when it watches it go back into the trees. When the hall breathed again, it did so more quickly. The boy king laughed, and his voice ran high, pleased to discover itself echoing in such a room. The queen's look went to the far door for a heartbeat and came back. A small, weary calculation concluded. Littlefinger folded a thought very carefully, as if to put it away and take it out later when it would buy more. Later, at the top of a narrow stair open to the wind, they showed Sansa the heads. The spikes were blackened with old use, the iron biting like a bad-tempered dog at what it had been given. The city had made a parade even of this, small folk craning to watch if a lord's face looked different when it died. Joffrey enjoyed himself, his hand pointed as if directing a singer in a verse. That one, and that. Sansa's face was white and thin and taut. A piece of porcelain somebody had forgotten was made to break and not to bend. He made her look. Her feet forgot the lesson she had been teaching them for weeks and slid. A captain of the guard kept her from falling only because it would have struck the boy's amusement wrong to have her die without being ordered to. The hound's hand closed on her upper arm with that infuriating, necessary gentleness he practiced as if he hated his own skill at it. "Careful, little bird," he said. "The drop is longer than your courage." His eyes, when they flicked away from her to the spikes, were not afraid or satisfied. They were merely old. Jon watched from the covered way behind the gargoyles where the wind threw his hair into his eyes and stung them. Ghost lay with his muzzle on his paws and made no sound. The hackles rose and sank once as if a breath had caught in them. Jon felt the sick-hot urge that every boy carries for a year or two of his life to rush forward and force the world to behave as it would in a story someone told by a fire on a better night. He did not. He marked the way the hound's fingers fit Sansa's sleeve. He marked which guards had their weight on the wrong foot and which had eyes for their own shadows. He marked that the queen's mouth did not move while the king smiled, that she watched the watchers, counting and counting again. At dusk Varys came like steam from a kettle and arranged himself on a bench not quite near enough to be accused of eavesdropping and not far enough to be innocent. "Grief is an honest workman," he murmured to no one in particular, "but he ruins the floors." Then to Jon, his smile snug and perfumed, "You have done what could be done for the one. The other is wrapped in silks and iron. She is useful. The city is greedy. It will keep her as long as it can." "What will you keep?" Jon asked. The question felt like trying to pick a lock with a fishbone. "My life," Varys said cheerfully, "and a few other people's, so I may persuade myself I am not a monster." He tipped his head. "Do not be rash. Rashness is a sword that only cuts the hand that wields it in this place." "She is a girl," Jon said. surprised at the flatness. "She is a Stark," Varys said, and the word did not sound like kindness or cruelty, only like a fact that would matter later. "If you want her out, you will not get her out by being what you are already. You will have to be something meaner for a night." "Show me where to be mean," Jon said. Varys's eyes softened for a second, the way a musician's do when someone else plays exactly the note they had not expected and wanted all their life. "When it is time," he said, and rose with the sigh of expensive cloth. That night Jon found the seam behind the panel Syrio had taught Arya to measure with her fingers and slid through like a letter through a slit. He moved by touch and air, counting the way draft whispers when corridors bend. He came to a place that breathed the warm smells of a girl's chamber, oils and old lavender, wool and a clean comb. He put his ear to wood and heard the controlled chaos of women's voices. Sansa's was among them, careful, pitched to be obedient. He waited. He learned how long it took for the last servant to leave and for the first of sleep's gentlenesses to begin. He tested the latch. It had been tied from the inside with a strip of silk, delicate and stubborn both. He let himself in. The room had gathered its shadows to itself. The girl sat at the window because windows are for weeping. She did not turn at his footfall until Ghost's breath made a draft. Then she did, and for a heartbeat the relief in her eyes made her seem 8 again, but that passed like heat. She stood and did not run to him, taught as she had been in the last weeks that running is not for ladies and that all of a lady's movements are messages other people read. "Don't," she said softly. "If you have come to tell me, I must be brave." "I did not," he said. "I came to tell you that we have a door and bread to take through it and people who will not steal your shoes while you sleep on a deck. The rest is not bravery. It is remembering to breathe." She laughed, small and broken in 2 perfect pieces. "If I leave, they will. The Queen said she could have my brother's head sent to me in a box with a ribbon on it." She said it kindly. "They do not have your brother," Jon said. "They have you. That is why they speak in ribbons." She sat. Her hands were very neat. "I wrote to Robb," she whispered. "They made me. I wrote to Mother. I told them to come and bend their knees and the king would be kind. I did not tell them I had seen Father. I did not tell them that the king is only a boy." "You told them what you had to tell to keep yourself alive," Jon said. "There is no shame in speaking the words the world holds at your throat when you need air. There is shame only in meaning them. Do not mean them." She looked at him then and saw that he meant it. "Will Robb come?" she asked in a voice that had been taught to speak as if speaking changes the world. "Yes," Jon said, because he knew his brother's stubbornness like his own skin. "He will come, and he will not bow his head where a boy points his finger. He will be many things." She stood again and reached for him suddenly the way a child reaches to touch a fire and be assured it is hot. He took her hands. "I will come," she said, and the decision traveled her body like warmth. Then her face worked and she shook her head with humiliating violence. "No," she added at once, breathless. "Not now. They put one of the Queen's women at the foot of my bed. She smiles in her sleep. The hound sleeps outside sometimes on a bench. He never sleeps." "We do not need now," Jon said. "We need a day. There will be another day. I will bring it." He put into her palm the small folded map of the keep he had made with ink and care and hope. Not the whole of it, only one corner, the stairs she would need to remember in the dark, the door she would be capable of opening with no more than what she had in her hand. He put a little purse in her other hand with salt and a piece of iron. "Do not let anyone see you take up anything but a ribbon," he said. "And cry if you need to. Crying is a door too." Ghost pressed his head into her hip once and sighed. Sansa bit her lip and did not say the girl's name who would have put her whole face into his fur and kissed his nose. "Does Arya live?" she asked instead. "She lives," Jon said. "And she hates me." He could say it calmly because it was so exact a description of love. Sansa's mouth softened. She nodded. After he left, she sat at the window until the sky lit with 1,000 colors that were meant to make men think of the gods and Jon of Winter. The city woke with the memory of a king's execution already beginning to scab. People argued over the price of lamp oil. A man swore he had seen a dragon over the river, and his wife told him his drink had had a separate adventure from his eyes. News came like spilled grain, fast and imprecise. Men said a boy with a wolf had risen in the north and called banners so loud the neck heard and offered them leeches. Men said the phrase had asked for a toll in brides and gotten it. Men said the young wolf had broken a host and taken a lion in a net. A singer got himself dragged by the ear for making a song in which the lion wept with only one eye and the wolf laughed all night. Somewhere in the Riverlands, Catelyn Tully counted men and bred and ways to keep both close until the end of the day, and failed only at keeping sleep close. Varys stood by a window with his hands folded like a woman's and said to anyone who would listen, "The boy is a river. He goes around what cannot be moved." Littlefinger made wagers with himself that he then paid himself for winning. The hound cleaned his sword with a slowness that mocked its habit of drinking quickly. The queen chose a dress as if it might be a banner that would win a battle for her without soldiers. At a different hour of the day than the last, Jon found the hound under a lintel that had cracked twice and been repaired once. He did not reach for his sword. The hound watched Ghost with the interest of one predator who has accepted, reluctantly, that another predator might be useful if pointed at the right throat. "You will get yourself killed for that girl," Sandor Clegane said, as if remarking on a man's poor way with boots. "I might," Jon said. "Do not ask me for help." "I have not," Jon said, and meant it. The hound lifted his chin the fraction that meant he had heard the truth. "She is softer than she thinks," he said. "Soft things do not live long when boys play at kings. If you take her, the queen will take someone else. That is how it works. You save a girl, a baker's son disappears. You save a baker's son, the city gives up a girl." "I know," Jon said, not because he had already made peace with it, but because the words had begun to scratch a mark inside him that would one day be a scar. "Do you intend to stop me because I need to be taught to be a better philosopher?" The hound's lip curled. "I intend to be at my post," he said. "If you do a thing I can pretend not to have seen, I will pretend not to have seen it. If you do a thing I cannot pretend not to have seen, I will do what I am paid to do." He pushed off the wall. "But if the boy raises his hand to her again, I may be less diligent in naming enemies than in counting them." "That is a kind of help," Jon said. "It is the only kind you will get." The hound left, his boots telling the stones nothing they wanted to hear. The city's afternoons had begun to bloat with heat. The river smelled old by evening. The Red Keep came alive at dusk like a thing that is shy by day. Jon moved in it with Ghost, lay on roofs to count the pacing of guards under him, put his eye to cracks to see the queen's women doing their small cruel work. He ate where men did not ask names. He taught himself to sleep in 10 minutes and to wake with his mind ready. He learned the watchword at 2 different doors and did not use either. He put his hand once more on the face of the godswood tree and asked for nothing. The tree accepted the nothing as if it expected to be repaid later in kind. From the north, a raven that might have been the same one as last time came back with a beak scuffed and a vexed air, and a strip of parchment with big writing cut to the truth. Robb had cut loose a lion and tied him again with his own honor. Jaime Lannister was in a tent and then in a tower and then in a chair with his hands bound. He was not in the field. The Riverlords ate like men who had earned it and slept like men who would have to earn it again in the morning. Someone had shouted a king's name and enough men had answered it that the word did not feel like a child's toy only. Catelyn had put her hand on her son's hair and been proud and afraid in equal measures. Jon read the words in a stairwell by the light that cheap tallow makes and listened to the sound his chest made when it closed around relief and refused to let it out. He hoped very suddenly and fiercely that Robb would not learn the wrong lessons from being obeyed. He hoped the Starks who had died in chairs did not move in their stone beds to laugh at a boy pretending to be winter in a room where the stones remembered summer. He folded the raven's news like a pledge and put it away. That night the queen sent Sansa to the sept to light candles and weep in a manner suitable to the court's understanding of grief. 6 women went with her like a moving piece of furniture, and 2 men took up positions with spears they did not hold as if they intended to use them. Jon had seen the Septry's side door twice before. He had pushed it once and found it bolted. He watched now from the chapel opposite, the one with a broken window that no one repaired because men came there to fornicate and then to pray for forgiveness, and it was convenient to come and go unseen. Sansa's face looked carved from a white fruit. She knelt and folded her hands, and if she prayed, the words were ones she would not share with a room. The queen's women murmured to one another in voices like paring knives. Jon counted the distance between Sansa's bench and the nearest pillar that hid a door's hinge. He counted the steps of the spearmen. He counted the ways this could go wrong and the two that could go right. He waited. When the candles burned low and the women had grown bored and began to pinch each other's arms as if rediscovering their own bodies were a way to pass time. The sound came that reaches into a sept from the street when a cart loses a wheel and the mule screams at the surprise of it. The women flinched and looked toward one another with annoyance at the city's insistence on existing outside their voices. The spearmen turned like hinges they had not oiled. Jon moved, not because of the cart which he had arranged, but because of the same thing that had made the cart fail. Timing. He came out of the apse like a shadow turned boulder. Ghost moved the other way, a white trick of the eye that did not touch the women and yet caused them to shriek as if their thigh had been brushed by a cold hand. Sansa stood when the sound reached her. He put his hand around her wrist and the other on the small of her back and made her move not fast but not slow. Just exactly the speed of a girl who has been told to come away from candles when her mother calls. The hound was not there. He had not promised to be. They made the door and the seam and the small space beyond it. Sansa's breath stuttered once and then found its box. The door closed. The old stones accepted the silence. They went the first stair and then the second and then down the passage where air turned stale. He let her fingers find the map in her pocket and feel it for faith. Ghost went ahead, footfalls soundless and purposeful, tail a white question mark that kept answering itself. A whisper traveled behind them, the women calling, the men's boots. Jon put his hand to Sansa's shoulder and pressed. The dry well, the door, the turn, the low place where even a tall man must bow his head. A shadow unfolded from the wall like silk shaken open. A hand reached and settled not on Sansa but on the door's wood. A voice like doves in a dovecot said, "Oh, my lambs!" Varys had all the keys again. He did not look at Jon, which is the only way to be kind to a man who has risked what you cannot measure. "If you go out that way now," he said mildly, "you will find 3 men and a pole that has learned a new trick. If you go another way, you will find a boat. The men on the boat will not know who you are and will like you less for being secret. They will like my gold better. If you wait 1 more hour, there will be a quarrel on the wall and no one will be watching the water. They will be watching their own blood." Sansa's throat clicked. "I cannot wait," she said. "I will die." "You will not die," Varys said gently. "Not today. It would not serve." Jon had to turn himself into the sort of instrument that accepts being played by a better player. He nodded once, which felt like taking off a cloak made of nails. Varys cocked his head, almost affectionate, as if he had been afraid Jon would try to kill him instead of listening. They went Varys's way, which wound through the keep as a worm winds through an apple, going where it wishes because it has been in the fruit the longest. Sansa's slipper scuffed once, and she hissed as if she had offended a god. Jon squeezed her wrist and kept her moving. Ghost brushed the paneling with his fur and left a ribbon there that no man would smell but that would tell a wolf later where its shadow had gone. They came to a slit that, in day, would have let a man stand and see only a patch of sky and think that was the world's shape. In night, it let a rope travel. Varys took a coil from behind a shutter like a magician pulling scarves out of his sleeve and tied it with a competence that suggested a childhood different from the one he liked to mention. He handed the end to Jon. "You know knots," he said. "Good. Do not let her spin." Sansa had never done a thing like it in her life and was not made for ropes. She was made for ribbons. She did it anyway, jaw locked, face set to something beyond down or up. Jon went after because the rope demanded his weight. He could not go before. Ghost did not climb. Ghost went elsewhere and would be wherever they were when they came to need a wolf again because that is what wolves do when they are loved by a boy who has chosen not to be a boy. They reached the lower place where the river's breath comes in and out of the keep's walls. A boat lay in the sump, low and sullen. Two men hunched in it, their faces made out of malice and boredom and something like fear, which is the least dangerous thing to see in such faces. Varys had his little purse out and his little smile. The men watched the coin, which is the only god in the city that shows its face. Jon put Sansa in the boat and stepped in beside her. "Do not look back," Varys said softly, as if to a child going to market for the first time. "If you look back, and if I am seen by the wrong eyes, I will have to tell a lie and my tongue will suffer for it, and I am fond of my tongue." Sansa nodded as if the humor hurt. Jon inclined his head not in gratitude but in acknowledgement of a bargain. Varys set them off with an elegant push, his fingers not quite touching the boat as if he feared contagion. They slid along the black water, which smelled like old wine and iron. Above them, somewhere, men shouted. One cursed another's mother so inventively Jon almost admired it. The men in the boat gave their attention to their oars like priests who believe in only one prayer. They came to the stony shelf where the river kisses the city and finds it brackish. A woman whom Jon had bought with 3 quiet favors and a basket of leeks because she had more children than patience waited with a bundle of old nets and the hunch of a back that had carried fish all her life. She rustled Sansa with brutal tenderness into a heap that smelled of hemp and salt and river. Sansa swallowed the down cry that wanted to come up. The woman looked at Jon once and then at the wolf who was not there and nodded, as if to say, "Some things go together and I do not need to like it to understand it." "Where?" Jon asked. The woman jerked her chin toward the open water where dawn had begun to make a smudge. "Out," she said. "Then east a little. Then north if the wind behaves. If not, west until a man with sense tells me otherwise. I sent bread in White Harbor that has not seen a mouse." He touched Sansa's hand where it protruded from the net, the bones light as birds. "Do not be brave," he whispered. "Be quiet and stubborn. Bravery is for men with lances. Quiet is for women who live." Her fingers closed once on his. "You are different," she breathed, as if surprise were a kindness. He did not know whether that was a blessing. He let go. The woman clucked. The oars bit. They slid away into the wet throat of the hour. He stood under the arch until the boat's shape had melted into the rivers and the river had forgotten it. The stones wept their usual slow tears. Behind him the keep's old veins sighed with air changing places with air. He pressed his fist once, hard, against the cold and left the shape of his knuckles. He turned and went back into the place that had eaten his father. He did not believe for a moment that the queen would not feel the absence by noon. He did not think the hound would do anything but shrug at a bench and say, "She ran like a hare." He did not expect Littlefinger to be anything but delighted by the complication. He did not wonder whether Varys would sigh and call it the realm's good fortune out loud and something else in his head. He did not care. He went to the Copper Roses and told the woman there that if 3 men came to look for a boy with black hair, she was to tell them he had run to join a company of mummers who needed someone to carry their ladder, and then he gave her more coin than the lie was worth because the lie would need to work twice. He went to the bowyer and told Gendry, "Not today," and the boy nodded too quickly to hide his relief and then scowled to hide that. He told the old cook that the bread would need seeds today because the men with gold cloaks were in a mood to chip their teeth on something new. By midday the city understood. It was ugly, the way understanding always is when it has been forced into a room where it does not fit. The queen's women screeched and then went calm in a way that meant their knives would be laid out later to be cleaned and sharpened. Janos Slint's men went in pairs and then in 4s. Littlefinger spent the day counting the results of wagers he had laid the week before on the outcome of events he had helped to write. The hound stood by a doorway and looked exactly as bored as a man does when he is working hard not to see something and doing it well. Joffrey raged and then, bored with rage as with everything, laughed and asked for his supper. The heads on the wall looked out and saw only what they had always seen. Gulls and a river and men who call themselves kings and then die. The small folk watched the gates and muttered new theories that would serve them until their bellies served them better. The singers wrote verses around the absence that made it sound like a dance instead of a theft. Jon slept with his mouth open that afternoon and woke with it full of ash. He dreamed he was in the crypt and the stone girl had set down her flowers and gotten up and walked to him and put her hand on the back of his neck the way a mother does. He woke with the touch of weight. Ghost had returned by then and stretched along the stones with an ease that made the keep seem a poor imitation of a den. He smelled of river and kitchen and the long cool of passages. Jon put his hand into the fur and felt the old drum. He thought of the ship sliding north and of Sansa coughing under nets and of her learning to keep the cough inside because she had learned in a different way to be quiet. Toward evening, a half-drunk man in a merchant's surcoat took Jon by the arm in a corridor and smiled, as if they had already shared a laugh. "Your Lord Father was a stubborn man," he whispered, breath herb-sweet over wine. "He taught stubbornness. The city will teach you something else. Do not forget the first when you are learning the second." Renly Baratheon squeezed once, hard, and went on, his smile alive and meant for other people. Jon watched him, surprised by the urge to like him and the good sense not to. He went, later, to the place behind a screen where he had once found a door breathing cold and stood with his forehead against the iron until the chill told his blood's heat what it was supposed to be. He counted to 100 and then 100 more. He thought of Benjen in White Wind and of a boy in Winterfell turning his face into a wolf's fur and laughing in a bed where the sheets had been shaken and remade and shaken again, trying to make room for a body that would not behave as before. He thought of Robb with his sword across his knees the way dead kings had been painted, feeling the river under his feet even in a tent on dry land. He did not think of the road back. Not yet. In the night a knock came to the door that only Ned's men had used, and because none of Ned's men were left who would knock that way, Jon did not open it. He waited. The knocking came again, lighter, as if the knuckle had learned a lesson. He slid the bolt and kept his foot braced. A page with hair like broom straw and eyes like an apology looked up at him from the half-dark. "Message," he said, thrusting a folded thing. The parchment smelled of winter. It had been written on by a hand that had always pressed too hard against the quill. The words were spare as northern trees in cold. "We are called. We have called. Your name is not on any banner and yet it is in men's mouths. If you live, write to me that you live. If you do not, I will know it when I do not feel you anymore." Jon folded it without reading it twice. A man cannot afford to read the same hope too often. It thins. He put it in the place where the letter about Bran's steps lived. The two together like two stones in a pocket a man touches when he must choose a road. At dawn, with fog pushed off its schedule again, Tyrion Lannister rode into the city with a ribbon of men at his back who wore odd bits of armor and looks of people who had come to belief late and were therefore enthusiastic. Mountain clans rode as if the streets were a bad idea someone else had made and they were humoring it. Tyrion's face had the smug satisfaction of a man who knows his letter will make other men gnash their teeth. He went to the queen and smiled, and to the throne and bowed, and to the small council and took a chair with the casualness of a man who has had many chairs and prefers this one only because it irritates his sister. Jon watched him under the lintel and remembered a night on the King's Road when the dwarf had told him to remember to be a man before a plan. He wondered idly whether Tyrion would try to govern in order to pay back at least one of his debts to his own sense of humor. He wondered whether the city, which eats good intentions like sweet cakes when it is hungry, would let him. The boat with the old nets did not come back for 3 days. On the third, a gull that had learned greed from men circled near the arch and screamed and then lit on a barrel. A scrap of cloth hung on the barrel's nail, tuck-stitched by a woman who had learned to hide messages in hems. Jon found it at dusk. The cloth had been torn from a dress that had been made for a girl to sit at a prince's feet. The stitch was clumsy and urgent, the way all honest communications are. Said only, "Bread white warm safe." It was enough. He put it in his mouth and tore a strip off with his teeth and then, laughing at himself, tucked it into his shirt like a charm. That night he slept with his palm on Ghost's ribs and did not dream of the crypt. He dreamed of a road running north under a sky that could not make up its mind what to be, and of footsteps behind him that kept their own counsel, and of a voice ahead that might have been the sea and might have been leaves. He woke with his jaw clenched and his heart careful. He drank water. He went to the yard and worked until sweat found his eyes and then kept working until it burned away. He had time. He did not have much. The city breathed and was not merciful. Men would come. Men would go. The world, which had turned under him once already since he left the hall with the sweet rushes, would turn again. He adjusted his sword belt to the notch it had learned last week, listened to Ghost blow air through his nose like a weary horse, and stepped back into the corridors under the red stone, where men teach themselves to walk as if walls have ears and eyes and appetites and all must be fed if a man means to pass.